the scene. We've got one victim pronounced at the hospital, and she was 6 to 8 weeks pregnant. So we have a triple homicide.
Hair is your crown. And the one thing you can control is your crown.
She was going to get her money back.
In this second episode of a two-part special, we wrap up a complex mystery.
Who's our shooter? Who's our driver? Are we 100% sure we got this right?
Featuring unexpected suspects.
She looked like a schoolgirl. I mean, she was very young.
2 other witnesses described seeing a man on the scene.
And a trial filled with surprises.
We didn't know which way it was going to go.
I want justice for my child.
In January 2016, Memphis, Tennessee police are investigating a shooting in an apartment parking lot, which first claimed the life of 30-year-old Eddie Tate Jr., then his girlfriend, 33-year-old Edwina Thomas, and their unborn baby.
Meaning that law enforcement, they're no longer dealing with a homicide or a double homicide. Now they're dealing with a triple homicide.
The victims' loved ones are desperate for answers.
You get on social media, like everybody's making up stories, everybody's creating their own narrative.
The shooting happened when Eddie was supposed to be meeting a customer for his mobile hair business, Virgin Hair for Us.
This case revolved around the sale or a transaction involving hair or hair weave. And some people may look at it as if, well, this is trivial, this is minor, but not necessarily for the Black community. Hair is your crown. And the one thing you can control is your crown. So this is a cultural thing among many Black Americans. The hair business among the Black community is an $8 billion business every year.
In the hours after the shooting, detectives trace a vehicle seen fleeing the crime scene to 18-year-old high school student Victoria C. They question her at the station.
When Victoria is interviewed, she names Shelby Isaac.
She says that Shelby, her high school classmate, bought 3 bundles of hair from Eddie earlier that day, but was unhappy with her purchase and wanted a refund.
We asked her, was she discussing robbing him, since she said she wanted her money back? And the initial statement was no. She never straight out said that it was going to be a robbery, but that she was going to get her money back.
Victoria tells police she drove Shelby to meet Eddie at Sycamore Lake Apartments for the second time that day.
As they approach the parking lot, Victoria drops off her friend Shelby to go handle the transaction while she goes and finds a parking spot.
Victoria claims she heard gunshots and then saw Shelby holding a gun.
And she hops in the vehicle, drives off without her friend.
So Victoria says she does not know where Shelby went. She pulls out of the complex and she's calling her on the phone. They meet up several minutes later. They talk. According to Victoria, Shelby says that she shot the hairman, and the lady said that she was pregnant.
Victoria claims that after the incident, she and Shelby hung out with their friend Darian Melvin. Then they dropped Shelby off with another friend, Gary Dotson. When Victoria finishes her story, investigators aren't sure what to believe.
We didn't know if she was lying. We didn't know if she was trying to blame someone else. So we had to verify that the information that she was telling us was in fact correct.
There is one detail from Victoria's story that makes them think she might be telling at least part of the truth.
There's no way that either Shelby or Victoria could have known that Edwina Thomas was pregnant. She was only 6 or 7 weeks pregnant. I just don't think that they would have been able to get that information any other way. That was very important to the investigation.
Victoria is arrested and charged with accessory after the fact.
She received a $10,000 bond and was out of jail after making that statement.
Investigators take a closer look at 18-year-old Shelby Isaac. Like Victoria, Shelby appears to be an unlikely murder suspect.
She was a high school student who did very well. She was a smart girl. She had applied to colleges and had been accepted to 3 different colleges. She was looking forward to going to college and finishing her degree and moving on to a career.
People will say, how can an honor student commit such a heinous act? But people live double lives all the time. While she's in school, there's supervision. When she's not in school, she can be a completely different person because there's a lack of structure.
Determined to get to the truth, investigators seek Shelby out for questioning.
We went to family members' houses. We went to her residence. Anything that she had ever listed as an associate, we went to all these different places, but we didn't have any luck finding her.
Investigators are able to locate 18-year-old Darian Melvin, the young man Victoria told them she and Shelby hung out with following the shooting. Darian confirms he went for a ride with Shelby and Victoria, and both of them seemed on edge.
He said the car was very tense, but they all normally joked around, so he was joking around. And I think he actually made a joke about Shelby's hair, to which she responded some version of like, shut up or I'm gonna shoot you.
Darian also confirms that they dropped Shelby at the apartment of another friend, Gary Dotson.
Gary Dotson was Victoria C.'s boyfriend. His brother, I believe, was Shelby's boyfriend.
But when investigators attempt to locate Gary, turns out he's laying low.
Gary Dotson, there were multiple attempts to find him, and sometimes, witnesses just don't want to be found.
2 days after the shooting, Shelby Isaac's attorney brings Shelby into the station.
And her attorney states, they're not going to give a statement at this time.
That is not any indication of guilt. Something that you said could be twisted to make it look as though you were guilty. That is admissible in court. So there is no benefit that you can receive from speaking to a detective in a situation like this.
That's certainly people's right. They don't have to talk with us. That just makes the job that I have to do even more important.
Before Shelby leaves, she makes an unusual move for someone facing multiple homicide charges.
She was caught actually taking a selfie inside that particular interview room. We were not happy. We were not happy with that. I really thought she wasn't really worried about this, didn't think it was a big deal.
While investigators still believe that Shelby was involved in some way, they face the fact that for now, the teen will walk free.
There was not an arrest made for Shelby Isaac. We had to verify that the information Victoria is telling us was correct. We had to corroborate that at a minimum, they were either together, another witness saw Shelby on the scene. We had to put them together some kind of way. And at the very beginning, we were not able to do that.
She's not going to give a statement, and that's when they released her without charge.
Was I happy about her walking out that door? Absolutely not.
They still hadn't determined, again, who's our shooter, who's our driver. Are we 100% sure we got this right before we put murder charges on people?
Days after the homicides of Eddie Tate Jr., Edwina Thomas, and their unborn child, investigators have released suspect Shelby Isaac due to a lack of evidence. Her alleged getaway driver, Victoria C., remains out on bail. Determined to get to the truth, investigators keep tabs on Shelby by watching her social media accounts.
She was very active on social media, very active on Facebook, Snapchat, different things like that. It seemed a little strange to us of some of the quotes that she made right after she's been accused of committing a triple homicide. There was a lot of posts that she did that just kind of led us to believe that she thought that this is just an inconvenience for her and then she's going to go back to living her life.
Investigators subpoena Eddie Tate's phone records from the date of the shooting.
We noticed that there were 8 calls that day from a number, and that number was the last number to call him before, unfortunately, he lost his life. We had an investigator take this number and run it, so to speak, and see what we could find to connect it.
The phone number leads investigators to a familiar name, Shelby Isaac.
They were able to tie it back to a number that we knew that she used. It went back to her family member's account, but it was a number that was commonly associated with Shelby and being Shelby's phone number.
The records place Shelby in contact with Eddie, but do not prove she is a killer.
This was not the first time that Shelby had purchased hair from Mr. Tate. This was not the first time that she had spoken to or met with him.
Detectives continue their hunt for evidence. They obtain security footage from a resident at the apartment complex where the shooting took place.
We did not have any video of the actual shooting. A witness came forward who, ironically, was in his apartment complex setting up a security system. It's audio and videoed. It's time-stamped.
Although you can't see, because it's the interior of his apartment, you can't see out and see the murder. What you can do is hear the gunshots. This is loud, it's gruesome, it's mean, and it's evil.
The recording allows detectives to make an important connection. The last of the 8 calls that Shelby made to Eddie came just moments before the shots rang out.
The timestamp is, exactly the time. So we were able to verify and use that timestamp information to match up with the phone records.
Together, the recording and the phone records further prove Shelby was in contact with Eddie just moments before he lost his life. But it still doesn't prove who pulled the trigger. In the hopes to gather more evidence, authorities processed Victoria C.'s silver Mitsubishi.
I did a search warrant on that vehicle. There was a sweatshirt that was found. That sweatshirt was examined at that time, and it showed to have a red substance on it, which tested positive for human blood. There was a DNA swab taken of that shirt, and then the shirt itself was tagged in the property room, and it was later sent to the TBI lab for DNA testing.
On February 2nd, investigators re-interview Victoria C.
The police called her back, confronted her with some of the evidence that we had, and she gave a second statement to police.
This time, Victoria adds a significant new detail to her story.
She said that when Shelby got in the vehicle, when she picked her up in front of the apartment complex, she had blood on her hands. During the first interview with Victoria, she never mentioned Shelby Isaac having any type of blood on her hands when she got in the vehicle. She said that when Shelby got in the vehicle and reached to either move her purse or retrieve her purse, and possibly got on the shirt that way.
Investigators now feel they have enough evidence to arrest Shelby Isaac.
We were ultimately able to, put the pieces together, and there was an arrest warrant issued.
On February the 5th, Shelby came and turned herself in, but said, "I don't have any information for you." My advice in almost every case is for my clients not to give a statement.
Shelby is charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Detectives share the news with the victims' families.
They just told us she was a young lady who was disgruntled about a purchase she made, and she wanted her money back.
I was angry. I was pissed. How could somebody, like, you're in high school. Like what are you doing? Over some hair?
Memphis police have charged 18-year-old Shelby Isaac with murdering Eddie Tate Jr., Edwina Thomas, and their unborn child.
Once Shelby Isaac became the focus of police investigations, her family hired 2 expensive, high-profile attorneys.
Facing 3 charges of first-degree murder, Shelby is held without bond.
What we did is we began preparing for the preliminary hearing. At this point, we knew that Victoria C. was the primary source of evidence against Shelby.
Detectives know Shelby's attorneys will attempt to discredit Victoria's statement. A part of that statement is that Victoria claimed Shelby had blood on her hands when she got in the car.
One thing that corroborated what Victoria told us was what was found in her car was a jacket that had blood on it.
Investigators learned that the DNA results from the bloody sweatshirt are back.
The sweatshirt DNA was a mixture of at least 2 people, and the major portion of the mixture, which is the person that was contributing more DNA to that mixture, matched Eddie Tate.
What that tells us is whoever you think did it, they were in the car with Eddie's blood on them in Victoria's car shortly after this happened.
But there's a problem with the second minor portion of the mixture on the shirt.
For the minor contributor profile of the DNA mixture that I obtained, there was not enough DNA information there for me to do any kind of comparison. The minor DNA profile was inconclusive. I was not able to do a comparison to Victoria Say or Shelby Isaac.
That does not mean that they're completely innocent. It just simply means that you can't tie them to the crime using DNA.
Still in need of more evidence placing Shelby at the scene, investigators combed through the case file.
I went back over my witness statements. I went back over my crime scene photos. The witnesses on the scene, they see someone in multicolored leggings go inside the victim's vehicle. When Edwina Thomas, when her clothing is recovered from the hospital, she has gray pants. When Victoria is arrested, she has black pants on, and the witnesses described her having black pants.
Authorities believe Shelby was the woman in the multicolored leggings.
So I'm theorizing that Shelby went inside the vehicle after the shooting. I go back to Eddie Tate's vehicle. There's papers on the front passenger seat. These papers are still there from when the car was processed. It's in a secured lot. It's our impound lot.
There was stuff in the floorboard of the car, and also the glove compartment was open.
I retrieved those papers. There's several bank receipts. There's a couple of envelopes and a couple of, like, debit cards.
The detective, being a good detective, he gathered up everything and said, let's check this.
They send the items to the Memphis Police Department's latent fingerprint examiner.
We have this system now that we call AFIS. And what it is, it's an automated fingerprint identification system, and it electronically encodes and records and retains fingerprints.
The examiner compares the fingerprint on the bank receipt found in Eddie's car to those of Shelby Isaac.
I saw that Miss Isaac had loop patterns in her hands, so I just began to compare the loops on her hand to the loops on the receipt until I found the correct finger, which was her number 3 finger or the middle finger, to make the positive identification. The importance is that it simply put Miss Isaac at the scene. There was no denying that she was at the scene.
If Shelby was the woman in the leggings seen rummaging through Eddie's vehicle, that could help prosecutors prove a potential motive.
Police think after the shooting, she's rummaging for money to get back what she thought was rightfully hers.
I believe that Shelby was very angry that Eddie wasn't budging. He was not going to give her money back. He was not going to refund her $250. He was not going to do that.
Maybe for Shelby, this was her retribution. This was payback.
On March 8, 2016, nearly 6 weeks after the shooting, the families of Eddie Tate Jr. and Edwina Thomas attend an arraignment hearing for Shelby Isaac, hoping to witness justice firsthand.
Her attorneys asked for the evidence to be presented to a judge instead of a grand jury.
But the hearing takes a shocking turn.
At the end of the preliminary hearing, the judge determined that the state had not met the burden of proof, which is a very low burden of proof in general sessions. And the judge at that point dismissed the case entirely.
The judge didn't want to try this case. The judge said there was not enough evidence to try it. So at that moment in time, Shelby was able to walk free.
I fell to my knees and I said, no, that's not it. No, she's not killing my baby and get away with murder. I want justice for my child.
On March 8, 2016, a judge dismisses the case against Shelby Isaac. The 18-year-old suspected of fatally shooting Eddie Tate Jr., Edwina Thomas, and their unborn child. Shelby could be released in a matter of hours.
It kind of deflated me because it was like, yeah, you made the arrest, thank you. But now, this is the hard part of us, just kind of accepting what happened, going through the court process, and then to put your trust in the justice system, and then you feel like it failed because it was thrown out.
You all told me that this girl would look at 50 years to life, and now she walking free? She killed my child like he was a dog and left him laying in the street?
The family didn't want to let it go. The state didn't want to let it go. They truly believed they had the right person.
But the arraignment judge declining to send the case to trial does not mean it's over.
That does not bar the prosecution from still seeking an indictment. And actually, the prosecutor immediately took Shelby's case up to a grand jury.
I knew that the grand jury was going to convene that afternoon, and so I prepared an indictment. Grand jury looked at it and found there was a true bill. An indictment merely means that there's enough evidence to go to trial.
Well, I got a phone call. It was telling me Miss Tate is taken care of.
The news is a complete turnaround for Shelby Isaac and her family.
Her parents, her mother, her siblings was there at the entrance waiting on her to come out. And the officer put the handcuff back on her and said she failed. She fell to her knees and said she started crying.
Obviously, there was a roller coaster ride. It was dismissed. And then to turn around and have that indictment come down the same day, which normally the indictment process in Shelby County takes months. And for that to happen so quickly, it was jarring.
The defendant was not released, so she stayed in jail from that day on.
For the next year, both sides prepare for a complicated trial.
For you to have a crime and charges to stick, you need to have what we call mens rea and actus rea. That means we need a guilty mind and a guilty act. So with this first-degree murder, you have to prove that it was premeditated.
We have no witnesses, no smoking gun, who saw the shots being fired. We had a defendant who's really left no traces except for her fingerprints on a receipt.
I can't stress enough how circumstantial this case was, but collectively, it was always our theory that when you look at it together, it's very clear what happened.
In November 2017, the trial begins. There is one name conspicuously missing from the witness list: Shelby Isaac.
She did not testify. She looked like a schoolgirl. I mean, she was very young, but she had glasses on. She had like a little polo sweater. And I mean, you look and you think, wow, this person charged with murder?
The only message from Shelby comes in the form of her plea, not guilty.
The atmosphere in the courtroom was very tense from both sides. You feel the weight of it, and that's what adds to, honestly, the gravity of the situation and the importance of the situation. But both sides had a ton of support, and it was stay in a room only for a while.
Prosecutors hit the ground running, calling a surprise witness to the stand, Gary Dotson. Located just 2 days before the trial, Gary testifies that Victoria dropped Shelby off at his house on the afternoon of January 22nd, 2016, just hours after the shootings.
Shelby and Victoria show up where Gary's staying. Victoria leaves in the silver Mitsubishi. Shelby stays there.
Mr. Dotson testified that when she came in, she looked tired. That was his word. And that she had a wad of money just balled up.
Prosecutors suggest that the money could have been proceeds from Eddie's sales that day, money Shelby stole from him after the shooting.
The state's theory was she just wanted her money back. We thought that she set up this second meeting to take care and to get whatever money Eddie had.
According to Gary, Shelby wanted to take a nap.
She went to the restroom, then went to his bedroom where she laid down what he described as a 9mm Ruger pistol.
What Gary says next delivers a serious blow to Shelby's defense.
He went through the magazine with the ammunition and saw that rounds had been fired.
He said that he noticed that the magazine was not full, that it only had 3 or 4 rounds in it. So it had been shot a few times at least.
Even so, Gary Dotson kept his observations to himself until now.
He didn't say anything to Shelby. He did not call authorities. Street code.
Neither Gary nor prosecutors know what happened to the gun.
It could be anywhere. It could be in the Mississippi River, it could be in a dumpster somewhere, but it was never located.
Shelby's team of high-powered defense attorneys take aim at Gary, leveling an accusation that no one sees coming.
The defense tried to imply that Gary Dotson was somehow involved in this situation.
The biggest thing that I kept on coming back to was all of the witnesses that were in this apartment complex. Windows around the center parking lot area that looked out as soon as they heard shots. 2 other witnesses described seeing a man on the scene.
In November 2017, the murder trial of Shelby Isaac is underway in Memphis, Tennessee. Prosecutors have called Shelby's friend, Gary Dotson, to the stand.
Gary told me everything that he saw. He witnessed Shelby with the gun. He witnessed her with a wad of cash.
Having carefully combed through the multiple witness statements from the day of the murder, Shelby's defense hones in on a previously ignored detail.
2 other witnesses described a man there with Victoria. That was the one thing that I kept on coming back to.
If a man was there, could it have been Gary? The defense argues another important detail.
Gary had several things in this case that could have implicated him. There was a black sweatshirt that Victoria identified as being Gary Dotson's sweatshirt that was covered in Eddie Tate's blood.
Prosecutors counter by arguing no one can prove the bloody sweatshirt was Gary's. They also call a forensic expert who suggests a connection between the 9mm Gary saw in Shelby's possession and the 6 shell casings collected from the crime scene.
A ballistics expert examined and testified that the bullets and the evidence all point to that these rounds came from a Ruger handgun, the very same type of weapon that Gary Dotson said that he saw belonged to Shelby Isaacs.
But that gun was never found, never tested, most certainly never located in Shelby's belongings.
Darian Melvin, the friend that was with Victoria and Shelby on the afternoon of the murder, also takes the stand. In addition to experts who testify about Shelby's fingerprints and phone records, the prosecution's case ultimately hinges on the testimony of one young woman, Shelby's friend, Victoria C.
When Victoria testified, she pretty much told the jury and everyone that she took Shelby back over to meet with EJ because Shelby was upset about her hair purchase and she wanted her money back. Victoria testified, I think she said she dropped her off and Shelby started to walk. So she then went to park the car, and by the time she got out of the car to go to where they were meeting at, she heard gunshots.
Defense attorneys circle back once more to eyewitness accounts, careful to point out that Victoria is the only person who positively identifies Shelby as being at the scene of the murder.
All of the lay witnesses described seeing Victoria. They described her, what she was wearing, and then they described Edwina Thomas getting out of the car.
According to Shelby's defense, the woman witnesses described as wearing colorful leggings could have been anyone.
Victoria C. was out there. Edwina Thomas was out there. Shelby Isaac was never identified by any of those lay witnesses. How do they think that they can prove that she did this or that she was out there? Because no one, aside from Victoria C., put her there.
Shelby's attorneys continue to attempt to discredit the prosecution's evidence, one piece at a time.
None of the evidence pointed to Shelby. There was never any forensic DNA evidence. There was a fingerprint belonging to Shelby that was located on a receipt inside of Eddie Tate's car. But Victoria described at the initial meeting when Shelby actually did meet Eddie Tate at that McDonald's to purchase the hair, Victoria C. described Shelby sit down inside on the passenger side of Eddie Tate's vehicle, actually getting into the car with him, which is precisely where that piece of evidence was found. There was nothing about that fingerprint on that receipt that implicated Shelby in this shooting at all.
On November 17th, both sides make their closing arguments.
The investigator had said, follow the evidence. And I brought that back up in closing argument because if you follow the evidence, it does not lead you to Shelby. It leads you to Victoria C. It might lead you to Gary Dotson, but it does not lead you to Shelby.
On rebuttal, the prosecution disagrees.
Victoria didn't buy hair from Eddie. Shelby did. Gary Dotson didn't think he got bad hair. Shelby did. Nobody else had given their money to Eddie. Nobody else wanted their money back. It was Shelby's. She made the decision to pull that trigger multiple times. That's why we were here.
As closing arguments wrap up, neither side rests easy.
It was a very contentious trial, and a lot of people didn't think that we would get a conviction on it.
She took a life, and I said, I know it's not gonna bring my baby back, but I think she should give a life. I felt like out of all the hurt and pain I had suffered, I deserve a peace of mind to know that you are somewhere locked up and you won't hurt anybody else's child.
After 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returns their verdict in the murder trial of Shelby Isaac.
Of course, everybody's terrified, nervous, scared, anxious.
It was almost suffocating, like the air in the room. But you sit there, you stand up for the jury to come in, then the judge says, everybody be seated. And they ask, have you reached a verdict? The foreman says yes.
Ms. Isaac, please stand.
The trial jury in this case found her guilty of second-degree murder, which is a knowing killing of Eddie Tate. They found her guilty of reckless homicide in the count 3, which was related to Edwina Thomas. In the final count with the unborn baby, they found her guilty of criminally negligent homicide.
When they said guilty, it was like a sense of relief because we didn't know which way it was going to go.
The news hit Shelby hard.
When the word guilty came out of the foreperson's mouth, even before the charge had been read of what they found her guilty of, Shelby started collapsing.
Ms. Murphy, is that your verdict? Mr. Oliver, is that your verdict? Ms. Foster, is that your verdict?
Yes.
And is that your verdict, ma'am? Is that your verdict, ma'am? Sir, is that your verdict? Ma'am, is that your verdict?
It was a hard moment for me, not just as an attorney, but as a person seeing this happen. When you have this girl literally passed out on the floor, and all around the rest of the courtroom was business as usual. The judge didn't even stop polling the jury.
Her family was overcome with emotion. They started screaming and crying, and I've always thought the reality of just how serious this was and the consequences that she now faces finally set in with the reading of the verdict.
As to count 2 of the indictment, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder.
I'm sure she was overwhelmed. Your life is now impacted. You took lives, now you have to give a bit of yours.
The judge said, your son was 30 years old. So guess what, Miss Tate? We're going to take 30 years of her life, then we're going to give her 30 years. 30 years without parole.
I feel like 3 lives are worth more than 30 years. She took away a mom, a daughter, a sister, a best friend. Like, she took all of that away from us.
As time has gone on and I've grown, I feel sorry for her. I feel sorry for her because she made a decision that impacted so many people, including herself.
This was a very sad case where a man, a woman, and their unborn child lost their lives. And that is tragic. There is nothing that can make that tragedy any less. But I truly, truly hope that Shelby gets another day in court because the evidence was not there. I mean, I just care about her as a person. And I really tried to give her absolutely everything that I could.
Victoria C. avoids trial with a plea deal.
She was an aider and abetter. She was offered accessory after the fact, 3 counts of it. And then she pled guilty to that.
She is sentenced to 6 years probation. For the victims' families, no amount of justice can replace the loss of their loved ones.
Edwina was just a kind person. She didn't deserve what happened to her. She was loved. She was so loved by many people. And her life was just taken away too soon.
We got justice, but yet and still didn't bring my baby back. To bury your child and look down on your child being put in the ground is more than a mother can bear.
I miss her. I miss him. Like, me and EJ were close in the time that they were together. I miss him. I wanted to know if I was gonna have another niece or nephew. So it hurts, but we take it one day at a time.
Reality of it is, you learn to live. You learn to live, but you don't forget. You never forget.
The house at 1702, D'Souza Place looked almost too perfect to belong in a murder story. On the evening of February 2, 2008, the windows reflected the fading gold of a Canadian winter sunset, and the quiet suburban street in Sannock, just outside Victoria, seemed untouched by danger. The lawns were trimmed. The driveways were empty. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then stopped. It was the kind of neighborhood where people forgot to lock their doors. The kind of place where real estate agents smiled confidently while talking about square footage, granite countertops, and family futures. But inside that empty million-dollar home, something was already waiting. Something calculated. Something patient. And before the night was over, 24-year-old Lindsay Buziak would be dead on the floor of the master bedroom, stabbed again and again with such violence that investigators would later say it looked personal, even though nobody could explain why. No fingerprints. No DNA. No robbery. No sexual assault. Just blood, silence, and a mystery that would haunt Canada for years. The strange part was that Lindsay had felt it coming. Not exactly death. Not in a clear way. But danger. A week earlier, she had received a phone call that unsettled her so deeply she mentioned it to multiple people. The woman on the line spoke with an accent Lindsay could not place. Some described it later as fake, almost theatrical, like someone trying too hard to sound foreign. The caller said she and her husband were moving to Victoria and urgently needed to purchase a home in the million-dollar range. It should have sounded like good news. Lindsay was young, ambitious, still building her reputation in real estate. A sale like that could change everything for her career. But instead of excitement, the call left her uneasy. The woman somehow had Lindsay's private cell phone number. She was oddly insistent. And according to those close to Lindsay, there was something cold in the way the caller spoke, something rehearsed. Still, Lindsay agreed to meet them. Because that's what professionals do. They ignore the uncomfortable feeling in their stomach and smile through it. A few days later, Lindsay admitted to her boyfriend, Jason Zilo, that the entire situation made her nervous. She told him she didn't want to go alone. Jason promised he would accompany her to the showing at the vacant house on D'Souza Place. He would wait outside if she wanted space to work, but he would stay close. It sounded like a reasonable compromise between caution and professionalism. Neither of them could have imagined that the decision would place Jason just yards away from the scene of one of the most infamous unsolved murders in Canadian history. At around 5:30 that evening, neighbors saw Lindsay arrive at the property. She was dressed professionally, carrying herself the same way she always did during showings, confident, polished, warm. Witnesses later described seeing a couple approach the home shortly afterward. The man was tall, dark-haired, clean-cut. The woman was older than Lindsay, perhaps in her late 30s or early 40s, with blonde hair and a striking patterned dress. Nothing about them screamed danger. Nothing about them suggested that within minutes, someone inside that house would die violently. But one witness remembered something investigators would later cling to: the handshake. Lindsay shook their hands the way people greet strangers for the first time. Not friends. Not acquaintances. Strangers. The three entered the house together. Then they vanished. For nearly an hour, nobody saw the couple leave. When Jason arrived, he stayed in his vehicle at first, giving Lindsay space to conduct the showing professionally. He later said he didn't want to appear possessive or controlling by hovering nearby. He texted her. No response. Minutes passed. The winter evening darkened around him. He tried again. Silence. Something began clawing at the edges of his mind. He stepped out of the vehicle and approached the house. The front door was locked. He knocked. Nothing. He walked around the property, peering through windows into dark, empty rooms. Still nothing. And then panic began to replace logic. A friend who had arrived with him discovered the back door open. Jason ran inside. The house was eerily quiet. No footsteps. No voices. Just the muffled stillness of an unfurnished luxury home. He moved through the lower floor calling Lindsay's name, his voice echoing off empty walls. Then he reached the staircase and sprinted upward. And there, in the master bedroom, the nightmare finally revealed itself. Lindsay Buziak lay on the floor surrounded by blood. The attack had been frenzied. Brutal. Investigators would later determine she had been stabbed multiple times. There were almost no signs of defensive wounds, suggesting the first attack came quickly and unexpectedly. Maybe she trusted them long enough to turn her back. Maybe she never even saw the knife until it entered her body. Whatever happened in those final moments occurred with terrifying speed. The killers were gone. Not rushed. Not sloppy. Gone cleanly. Police would soon realize this was no random act of violence. Whoever orchestrated the murder had prepared carefully. The phone used to contact Lindsay was a prepaid burner phone purchased anonymously in Vancouver. It had only been used to communicate with her. After the murder, it disappeared forever. Cell tower data later showed the phone traveled from Vancouver to Vancouver Island shortly before the killing, likely aboard a ferry. It was as if someone had entered her life solely for the purpose of luring her into that house. And then erased themselves. As investigators dug deeper, the case only became stranger. Lindsay wasn't known to have dangerous enemies. Friends described her as energetic, ambitious, compassionate, and deeply loved by her family. She had dreams of building a successful future in real estate. She liked fashion. She loved travel. She laughed loudly. She remembered birthdays. The image of her lying alone in an empty bedroom became unbearable to the people who knew her because it felt so disconnected from the life she actually lived. Yet rumors began spreading almost immediately. Some theories focused on drug trafficking connections around people in Lindsay's social circle. Others suggested the murder had ties to organized crime. Some believed the killers were professionals sent to silence her because she knew something she shouldn't have. Others thought the crime was deeply personal, hidden beneath a carefully staged execution. Online forums exploded with speculation. Amateur detectives dissected every detail of the crime scene, every interview, every timeline inconsistency. And at the center of all of it stood one impossible question. Who would lure a 24-year-old realtor into a vacant house just to butcher her? Even more disturbing was the precision. No forensic evidence of value was left behind. No clear witness sightings after the couple entered the home. No murder weapon ever recovered. It was as if the killers understood exactly how police investigations worked. Experienced detectives openly admitted frustration. Cases involving that level of violence usually generated mistakes. Blood transfer. Panic. Evidence. But this scene offered almost nothing. The murder looked emotionally explosive, yet operationally disciplined. Those two things rarely existed together. Years passed. Then more years. The story refused to die. Documentaries revisited the mystery. Podcasts analyzed every minute of Lindsay's final day. True crime communities became obsessed with the unidentified couple. Age-progressed sketches circulated online. Every anniversary reopened old wounds for Lindsay's family, especially her father, who became one of the loudest voices demanding justice. He refused to let the public forget his daughter's name. Refused to let investigators quietly file the case into permanent obscurity. And still, nobody was arrested. In 2021, investigators announced new developments involving advanced DNA technology and assistance from the FBI. Hope flickered again. People wondered whether modern forensic science might finally uncover what had remained hidden since 2008. But no breakthrough came publicly. No charges followed. The house on D'Souza Place remained standing, carrying its history like a stain invisible to the eye but impossible to erase. To this day, the murder of Lindsay Buziak remains officially unsolved. And maybe that is what makes the case so haunting. Not just the violence. Not just the mystery. But the chilling possibility that somewhere, someone remembers every detail of that night perfectly. Someone remembers the drive to the house. The sound of Lindsay greeting them at the door. The warmth inside the home compared to the cold February air outside. Someone remembers the final seconds before the attack began. And that person has lived free for nearly 2 decades. Because sometimes the most terrifying crimes are not the ones hidden in darkness. Sometimes they happen in beautiful neighborhoods, under soft evening skies, behind the doors of immaculate homes that look exactly like the places where people are supposed to feel safe. In early 2008, Victoria, British Columbia still carried the feeling of a city untouched by the harsher rhythms of the modern world. Perched on the southern edge of Vancouver Island, it was a place postcard photographers loved. Tourists arrived for the harbor views, the old architecture, the flower gardens, and the calmness that seemed to settle naturally over the streets like morning fog drifting in from the Pacific. People described Victoria as safe in the way people only describe places where they have not yet seen violence up close. It was the kind of city where strangers held doors open for one another and where real estate brochures advertised not just houses, but lifestyles. Quiet neighborhoods. Ocean air. Good schools. Peace. The illusion of peace, at least. The winter of 2008 had wrapped the city in cold rain and grey skies. February on Vancouver Island was damp in a way that crept into clothing and bones alike. Sidewalks glistened under streetlights after sundown, and the smell of wet cedar drifted through residential neighborhoods after every rainfall. Most evenings, the city quieted early. Families retreated indoors. Restaurants dimmed their lights. Ferries crossed the dark water carrying commuters and travelers between Vancouver and the island, their bright windows floating like ghosts against the Black Sea. It was beautiful from a distance. Calm. But beneath the polished image of Victoria existed another world, one less visible to tourists and open-house buyers. British Columbia in the mid-2000s had become increasingly entangled in organized crime, particularly drug trafficking networks linked to the booming cocaine and marijuana trade. Gang violence was rising across parts of the province, though much of it remained concentrated around Vancouver and the mainland. The average resident of Victoria rarely saw it directly. Criminal networks moved quietly through expensive neighborhoods and upscale businesses, blending into ordinary life with expensive watches, luxury vehicles, and carefully maintained appearances. The violence usually stayed hidden until it exploded suddenly and publicly. A shooting in a parking garage. A body discovered in a burned vehicle. A disappearance nobody could explain. Most citizens learned about those stories from headlines and quickly convinced themselves they belonged to another world entirely. But criminal influence does not always announce itself with gunfire. Sometimes it drifts silently through social circles, relationships, and business connections without anyone fully realizing how close danger has come. And by the time people recognize it, someone is already dead. At the center of this story stood a young woman trying to build a future for herself in one of the most competitive industries in Victoria, luxury real estate. The housing market during that period was thriving. Money flowed into Vancouver Island from wealthy buyers seeking quiet coastal living away from the intensity of major cities. $1-million homes rose along scenic hillsides overlooking water and forest. Real estate agents competed aggressively for clients because commissions on upscale properties could transform careers overnight. Success depended on image, confidence, networking, and availability. Agents answered calls late at night, met strangers alone, and constantly balanced instinct against ambition. Every new client represented opportunity. Every showing carried risk. For young agents especially, pressure was relentless. They needed to prove themselves quickly or disappear behind more established competitors. They smiled through exhaustion. They learned to charm wealthy clients twice their age. They drove across town for appointments that sometimes led nowhere. And because real estate relied so heavily on appearances, vulnerability often hid beneath polished professionalism. Lindsay Buziak understood that pressure well. By 24, she had already begun carving out a promising path in the industry. Friends remembered her as energetic and driven, someone who radiated confidence even when privately uncertain. She cared deeply about how she presented herself. Her clothes were stylish without seeming excessive. Her hair was always carefully done. She moved through open houses with practiced warmth, the kind that made people comfortable within minutes. But unlike the hardened veterans of the business, Lindsay still carried traces of youthful openness. She trusted people more easily than she should have. She wanted to believe good things were waiting for her. She had grown up in a close family that loved her fiercely. Her father, Jeff Buziak, would later become one of the loudest voices demanding answers about her murder, but before tragedy consumed his life, he mostly knew Lindsay as his daughter with big dreams and restless ambition. Friends described her laugh as contagious. She could shift from serious professionalism to playful joking in seconds. She liked fashion magazines, social outings, travel plans, and conversations about the future. Like many young adults, she existed in that strange in-between phase of life where everything still felt possible. Marriage, career success, financial independence, adventure, reinvention. At the time of her death, Lindsay was dating Jason Zylo, whose family had strong ties within the local real estate community. The relationship appeared serious, though not without complexity. People close to them later described occasional tension, the ordinary kind young couples experience while balancing careers and expectations. Still, there was no public sign that their relationship was spiraling toward tragedy. Photographs from that period showed two attractive young people standing together in expensive homes, smiling toward a future that seemed stable and bright. But beneath the surface, there were already moments that hinted at unease. Real estate agents become skilled at reading people because their safety sometimes depends on it. They notice strange behavior, uncomfortable eye contact, overly personal questions, clients who refuse to provide details. Lindsay had experienced difficult interactions before, as most women in the industry eventually do. Men flirting aggressively during showings. Buyers lingering too long in empty rooms. Calls arriving late at night from strangers who seemed more interested in the agent than the property. Female agents often developed quiet survival strategies without discussing them openly. Texting co-workers before appointments. Parking strategically for fast exits. Pretending someone else was nearby. So when Lindsay received the strange phone call roughly a week before her death, the discomfort registered immediately. The woman on the other end did not sound natural. According to later accounts, the accent felt forced, difficult to place geographically. Some believed it sounded vaguely Mexican or European. Others thought it resembled someone deliberately disguising their voice. The caller explained that she and her husband were relocating to Victoria and urgently needed to purchase a luxury home. They were wealthy, decisive, and ready to move quickly. To a young realtor, it should have sounded ideal. Yet Lindsay mentioned to multiple people afterward that the interaction bothered her. Part of the discomfort came from the number itself. The caller somehow had Lindsay's private cell phone rather than her standard business contact. Another unsettling detail involved the woman's insistence on dealing specifically with Lindsay, despite her relative inexperience in high-end property sales. It was unusual. Most buyers seeking million-dollar homes worked with established agents who specialized in luxury real estate. Lindsay wondered aloud how these people had even found her. Still, opportunity has a way of overpowering instinct. The property they wanted to see was located in Sannock, a municipality adjacent to Victoria known for its affluent residential areas and quiet suburban roads. De Souza Place was not a street associated with violence. It curved through an upscale neighborhood lined with large homes and carefully landscaped yards. On rainy evenings, Porch lights glowed warmly against wet pavement while expensive vehicles rested in spotless driveways. Residents walked dogs there. Children rode bicycles there. Nobody imagined the area becoming nationally infamous. The house itself stood vacant at the time. Newly built. Expensive. Clean in the sterile way empty luxury homes often are. Hardwood floors without scratches. Large windows without curtains. Rooms designed more for visual impact than emotional warmth. It was exactly the kind of property realtors loved showcasing because every surface projected wealth and possibility. But vacant houses also create isolation. No neighbors paying close attention. No family inside. No background noise from daily life. Just silence echoing through oversized rooms. As the appointment approached, Lindsay's nervousness apparently increased. She spoke about it enough that people remembered afterward. That detail matters because intuition often disappears inside true crime narratives, reduced to foreshadowing after the fact. But in reality, intuition is usually vague and frustrating. It does not scream run. It whispers small warnings difficult to justify logically. Lindsay could not point to a specific threat. The clients had not openly threatened her. They had not behaved aggressively. Yet something felt wrong enough that she asked Jason to accompany her to the showing. That decision would later become one of the most dissected aspects of the entire case. Jason agreed. According to later statements, the plan was simple. Lindsay would conduct the showing professionally while Jason remained nearby for reassurance. It reflected a compromise many women understand instinctively, maintaining independence while quietly accounting for danger. Neither of them could know they were walking into what investigators would later describe as an extremely sophisticated trap. Elsewhere, beyond Victoria, another series of events was unfolding quietly and methodically. At some point before the murder, someone purchased a prepaid burner phone in Vancouver using false information. The phone's only meaningful purpose appeared to be communication with Lindsay. Investigators would later trace its movement across cell towers as it traveled from the mainland to Vancouver Island shortly before the killing. The detail transformed the case from frightening to deeply unsettling because it implied preparation, planning, deliberate targeting. This was not random violence erupting impulsively during a showing. Someone had selected Lindsay. Someone had arranged the meeting carefully enough to leave almost nothing behind afterward. And perhaps most disturbing of all, whoever orchestrated it understood human behavior well enough to exploit Lindsay's ambition, professionalism, and trust. They built a scenario believable enough to draw her willingly into an empty house at dusk. By the evening of February 2nd, rain clouds hung low over Victoria as daylight faded early across the island. Cars moved through wet intersections under streaks of reflected headlights. Ferries crossed dark water. Families prepared dinner behind glowing kitchen windows. Somewhere, people laughed over drinks in warm restaurants while sports played on television screens overhead. And on De Souza Place, a vacant luxury home waited in silence for 3 people to walk through its front door. Only one of them would never walk back out. Before the headlines turned her into a mystery, before internet forums dissected her final hours frame by frame, Lindsay Buziak was simply a young woman trying to build a life she could be proud of. That is one of the cruelest things about violent crime. The victim's humanity often gets buried beneath the fascination of the case itself. People remember the bloodstains, the theories, the suspects, the police failures. But long before Lindsay became the realtor murdered during a house showing, she was somebody's daughter, somebody's girlfriend, somebody who laughed too loudly in restaurants and probably left half-finished coffee cups in her car between appointments. She existed as a real person with routines, insecurities, hopes, and plans that extended far beyond the evening of February 2, 2008. Those who knew Lindsay described her as magnetic. Not in the dramatic cinematic sense, but in the ordinary human way that makes certain people easy to be around. She was attractive, stylish, ambitious, and socially confident, yet she did not seem emotionally cold or arrogant. Friends remembered her warmth first. She had the kind of personality that filled silence naturally. Conversations with her moved quickly from joking to serious and back again. She could charm strangers because she genuinely liked connecting with people. In real estate, that quality mattered almost as much as skill. Lindsay grew up in British Columbia surrounded by family who cared deeply about her. Her father, Jeff Busiak, would later spend years publicly fighting for answers about her death, but before tragedy defined him, he mostly saw Lindsay as his vibrant daughter moving through early adulthood with determination and energy. Like many parents watching their children enter professional life, he worried about her sometimes. The world can feel different when you are looking at it through the eyes of someone who loves you. Risks become more visible. Strangers seem less trustworthy. But Lindsay was independent. She wanted to make her own way. And she was trying. At 24 years old, she stood at that fragile stage of adulthood where ambition and uncertainty coexist side by side. She was no longer a teenager drifting through temporary jobs and undefined dreams. She had chosen a path. Real estate represented more than employment to her. It symbolized status, stability, and the possibility of building something substantial for herself. Victoria's luxury housing market was competitive, but it also offered enormous rewards for young agents willing to work relentlessly. Lindsay threw herself into that world with intensity. The job demanded performance every day. Realtors were expected to look successful even before they became successful. Lindsay understood that image mattered. Her appearance was polished. Her clothing professional and fashionable. Her hair carefully styled before appointments. She carried herself with the kind of confidence clients wanted to see in someone handling expensive transactions. But beneath that polished exterior was still a young woman trying to prove herself in an industry dominated by older, more experienced professionals. There were pressures people rarely acknowledged openly. Commission-based work creates constant anxiety because income depends entirely on closing deals. One bad month can spiral into panic. One major sale can change everything. Lindsay wanted those major sales. She wanted recognition. She wanted the feeling that her life was moving upward. Friends later recalled how seriously she took her career despite her age. She wasn't drifting through the profession casually. She wanted to succeed. Her relationship with Jason Zylo also placed her close to influential circles within the local real estate community. Jason came from a well-known family connected to the business, and some observers believed Lindsay saw the relationship partly as emotional support inside an intimidating professional world. Whether fair or not, young women in competitive industries are often scrutinized through the lens of who they date rather than what they achieve themselves. Lindsay seemed aware of those dynamics and worked hard to establish her own credibility. Yet her life outside work still looked remarkably normal. She spent time with friends. She enjoyed nights out. She talked about future plans. Like many people in their 20s, she existed in that complicated stage between youthful freedom and adult responsibility. Some days she likely felt powerful and unstoppable. Other days she probably questioned whether she was truly succeeding at all. The image later painted by internet theorists often transformed Lindsay into either a completely naive victim or someone secretly entangled in dangerous worlds. Reality was almost certainly more complicated and more human than either extreme. People who knew her consistently described someone emotionally expressive and trusting. She formed connections easily. That openness made her likable, but perhaps also vulnerable. Real estate requires agents to interact constantly with strangers while maintaining friendliness and accessibility. Female realtors especially often navigate a difficult line between professionalism and personal safety. They enter empty houses alone. They meet unfamiliar clients in isolated properties. They answer calls from people they have never met. Most of the time nothing happens. But the possibility of danger always exists quietly in the background. Lindsay understood that better than outsiders might assume. In the years leading up to her death, concerns about realtor safety had become increasingly common throughout North America. Stories circulated about agents being harassed, stalked, or assaulted during showings. Some brokerages implemented safety procedures, though enforcement varied widely. Still, many young agents continued working alone because refusing clients or appearing fearful could damage professional opportunities. That context matters because Lindsay was not recklessly careless. The discomfort she later expressed about the mysterious clients suggests her instincts were active and functioning. She sensed something unusual. She simply did what many ambitious professionals do every day. She rationalized the discomfort because the opportunity seemed too important to lose. Friends later reflected on how excited and uneasy she appeared simultaneously in the days before the showing. The $1 million property represented a potentially career-changing commission. Luxury clients could open doors to future referrals and higher-end business. But the strange woman calling from the burner phone unsettled Lindsay enough that she discussed it repeatedly. There was something artificial in the caller's tone, something difficult to explain logically but impossible to ignore emotionally. People often underestimate how much intuition relies on tiny unconscious observations. A pause too long before answering questions. Overly rehearsed language. A voice that sounds emotionally disconnected from the conversation itself. Lindsay may not have known exactly why the calls bothered her, but her nervousness suggests her mind detected inconsistencies beneath the surface. Even so, she continued preparing for the appointment. On the surface, her final week looked ordinary. She worked. She socialized. She communicated with friends and family. There were no obvious signs that she believed her life was in danger. Yet afterward, small details gained unbearable weight. Conversations replayed endlessly in the minds of people who loved her. Did she seem distracted? Did she mention being afraid? Did anyone miss an opportunity to stop her from going? This is one of the quiet tragedies surrounding unsolved murders. Survivors become trapped in endless retrospective analysis, searching ordinary moments for hidden warnings. The reality is that Lindsay likely woke up on February 2nd believing she was heading toward a normal weekend evening. Maybe stressful. Maybe awkward. But normal. That Saturday carried the cold, damp atmosphere typical of winter on Vancouver Island. Grey skies stretched low above Victoria, and the air held that familiar scent of rain-soaked pavement and cedar. Lindsay prepared herself for the showing the way countless professionals prepare for important meetings. Clothes selected carefully. Makeup applied deliberately. Phone charged. Schedule organized. Perhaps she glanced in the mirror before leaving and thought about the potential commission waiting at the end of the appointment. Perhaps she reminded herself not to appear nervous in front of wealthy clients. At some point that day, she coordinated plans with Jason. He would accompany her to the showing for reassurance. The arrangement itself reveals something important about Lindsay's mindset. She was uncomfortable enough to want support nearby, but not frightened enough to cancel outright. Fear and ambition were competing inside her simultaneously. And ambition won. The image of Lindsay during those final hours remains haunting because nothing about her behavior suggests someone resigned to danger. She still made plans beyond that evening. She still believed in a future waiting for her after the showing ended. Maybe dinner afterward. Maybe conversations about work. Maybe another exhausting week chasing clients across Victoria's expensive neighborhoods. There is a tendency in true crime storytelling to freeze victims at the moment immediately before death, as though their entire identity narrows into foreshadowing. But Lindsay's life contained countless ordinary moments untouched by violence. She laughed with friends in crowded restaurants. She drove through rainy streets listening to music. She worried about career advancement. She argued with people she loved and later made up with them. She probably spent money on things she didn't need and postponed responsibilities like everyone else in their 20s. She was alive in all the messy, unfinished ways human beings are supposed to be alive. That humanity becomes even more painful when placed against what investigators would later conclude about her murder. The attack appeared sudden, controlled, and deeply violent. There were few signs of struggle. It suggested Lindsay may have trusted the people around her until the final seconds. She likely entered that empty house still performing her role as a realtor, smiling politely, discussing property features, imagining another ordinary transaction unfolding. Meanwhile, whoever lured her there may already have known exactly how the evening would end. That contrast is what makes the case emotionally devastating. Lindsay was building a future while someone else was carefully constructing the circumstances of her death. And perhaps the most haunting detail of all is this: the killers almost certainly spent time studying her before the murder. They knew enough about her profession to exploit it. They understood she would respond to the possibility of a luxury sale. They recognized that she would likely agree to show a vacant home privately. They may even have anticipated her nervousness and calculated that professionalism would override it. In other words, Lindsay's best qualities may have been weaponized against her. Her ambition, her openness, her willingness to trust people despite discomfort. By the evening of February 2, 2008, Lindsay Busiak was not walking into that house as a doomed character in a crime story. She was walking in as a young woman trying to succeed at the life she had chosen for herself. And somewhere nearby, hidden behind polite smiles and rehearsed voices, death was already waiting for her. The evening of February 2, 2008 arrived slowly, wrapped in the cold grey stillness of a Vancouver Island winter. Sunset came early that time of year, and by late afternoon the sky above Victoria had already begun fading into the dull blue-black of approaching night. Rain from earlier in the day clung to the streets in reflective streaks, turning headlights into blurred ribbons of gold across wet pavement. People hurried between stores and restaurants with jackets pulled tight against the damp air. Inside warm homes, televisions flickered on and dinner plates clattered softly in kitchens. It was an ordinary Saturday evening in a quiet Canadian city. Nothing about it suggested that within hours, one of the country's most haunting unsolved murders would begin unfolding behind the walls of an empty luxury home. Somewhere before the appointment, Lindsay Busiak prepared herself for work the same way she had done countless times before. She dressed professionally because appearance mattered in real estate, especially when dealing with wealthy clients. The image projected confidence before a single word was spoken. She likely checked her phone repeatedly that afternoon, reviewing details of the meeting, perhaps hoping the uneasy feeling sitting in her stomach would disappear once everything actually began. But intuition rarely fades that easily. People later tried to reconstruct her emotional state during those final hours. Was she afraid? Nervous? Distracted? The truth was probably less dramatic and more human. Anxiety mixed with determination. A lingering suspicion pushed aside by professionalism. Lindsay was ambitious. She wanted the sale. And ambition often teaches people to silence the inner voice telling them something feels wrong. At some point before heading to De Souza Place, she communicated again with Jason Zylo. The plan remained simple. He would accompany her but stay nearby rather than hovering during the showing itself. It reflected an unspoken compromise many couples make in situations involving uncertainty. Jason wanted her safe. Lindsay wanted to appear competent and independent in front of potential clients. Neither of them knew they were moving toward a carefully arranged trap. The property waiting for them sat in Sanic, in an upscale neighborhood where expensive homes lined quiet curving streets. De Souza Place was calm that evening. Porch lights glowed softly against wet driveways. Trees swayed gently in the cold coastal breeze. Most residents inside nearby homes had no reason to look out their windows with concern. Nothing outwardly suspicious disturbed the peace of the neighborhood. The house itself stood vacant, unfurnished, and eerily pristine. New construction. Expensive finishes. Empty rooms carrying the faint sterile smell of fresh paint and untouched wood. Luxury homes without furniture often feel strange after dark because there is nothing inside to soften sound. Footsteps echo. Voices travel unnaturally through open spaces. Every movement seems slightly louder than it should. It was exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear into silence. Around 5:30 p.m., Lindsay arrived at the property. Witnesses later recalled seeing her outside the home shortly before the showing began. She appeared normal, calm, professional. Then the couple arrived. The woman stood out immediately because of her appearance. Blonde hair. A patterned dress described by witnesses as unusual for the weather and setting. She seemed older than Lindsay, perhaps late 30s or early 40s. The man accompanying her was tall, dark-haired, and clean-cut. Together they looked ordinary enough to avoid suspicion while still memorable enough that witnesses retained fragments of their appearance afterward. One detail would later become extremely important to investigators. A neighbor observed Lindsay greeting the pair with the kind of polite handshake people use with strangers they are meeting for the first time. Not friends. Not acquaintances pretending otherwise. Strangers. That moment matters because it destroyed later theories claiming Lindsay voluntarily entered the house with people she secretly knew well. Everything about the interaction suggested a routine business meeting between realtor and clients. 3 people entered the house together. Only one would remain inside. The exact sequence of events after they crossed the threshold remains one of the most disturbing mysteries in Canadian criminal history because nobody knows precisely what happened during those final minutes of Lindsay's life. There were no surveillance cameras inside the home. No surviving witnesses. No clear forensic reconstruction capable of revealing the entire truth. The silence inside that house swallowed almost everything. Still, investigators later pieced together fragments. At first, the showing likely appeared normal. Lindsay probably moved through the lower floor explaining features and specifications the way realtors are trained to do. Hardwood floors. Open concept design. Renovated finishes. Large windows. Square footage. She may have smiled politely while discussing neighborhoods and market value, still suppressing the unease she had mentioned days earlier. Maybe the couple asked ordinary questions. Maybe they wandered naturally from room to room while pretending to imagine themselves living there. Perhaps they complimented the property. Perhaps they behaved so convincingly normal that Lindsay slowly relaxed. Or perhaps she never relaxed at all. Because at some point, something changed. Investigators later concluded the attack happened quickly and with overwhelming violence. Lindsay suffered multiple stab wounds. The brutality shocked even experienced detectives. Yet strangely, there were relatively few signs of defensive struggle. That detail suggested the initial assault came suddenly, before she fully understood what was happening. It is possible she turned her back. Possible she was walking ahead of them upstairs. Possible she never even saw the knife until the first strike landed. The human mind struggles to process sudden violence, especially in environments where danger feels impossible. 1 second reality remains ordinary. The next second it fractures completely. A person selling houses becomes prey. Polite conversation becomes terror. Blood appears where moments earlier there had only been polished hardwood and silence. Investigators believed the killers targeted Lindsay specifically rather than attacking impulsively during a robbery or sexual assault. Nothing was stolen. There was no indication of sexual violence. The attack carried an unsettling sense of purpose. The wounds themselves appeared deeply personal in their intensity, yet paradoxically the overall crime scene reflected discipline and preparation. That contradiction haunted investigators for years. Most emotionally driven murders generate chaos, panic, mistakes, fingerprints, DNA. But whoever killed Lindsay managed to commit an extraordinarily violent attack while leaving behind almost no useful forensic evidence. No clear fingerprints. No identifiable DNA. No obvious murder weapon. It was as though the killers entered that house already understanding exactly how police investigations worked. Meanwhile, outside the property, time continued moving normally. Jason arrived near the home shortly after the showing began. According to later accounts, he initially remained inside his vehicle because he did not want to appear controlling or intrusive. That decision would later torment public discussion surrounding the case, though hindsight always transforms ordinary choices into unbearable what-ifs. At the time, his behavior probably seemed completely reasonable. He waited. Minutes passed. Inside the darkening house, something terrible had already happened. Jason eventually attempted to contact Lindsay by text message. No response. Perhaps he assumed she was busy with clients. Realtors often silence phones during showings. But as more time passed, concern began replacing patience. He tried again. Still nothing. The winter air outside had grown colder by then. Streetlights illuminated wet pavement in soft yellow pools. Nearby homes glowed warmly against the darkness. Yet the house on D'Souza Place remained strangely silent. Jason stepped out and approached the property. The front door was locked. He knocked. No answer. At that moment, anxiety likely transformed into genuine fear. Human beings recognize when situations shift from ordinary silence into something wrong. Jason circled the house, peering through windows into dark, empty rooms. He called out for Lindsay. Nothing answered him except the hollow stillness of the vacant home. Then a friend accompanying him discovered the back door open. Everything afterward unfolded quickly. Jason entered the house. The interior was quiet in a deeply unnatural way. No conversation. No footsteps. No movement. Just empty rooms holding the fading remnants of daylight. He moved through the lower level calling Lindsay's name, probably still hoping for some harmless explanation. Maybe the clients had stepped outside. Maybe she had left her phone elsewhere. Maybe she was upstairs finalizing details. Then he reached the staircase. And somewhere in those seconds before entering the master bedroom, his life permanently divided into before and after. When Jason found Lindsay, she was lying in a pool of blood inside the upstairs bedroom. The attack had been catastrophic. Violent enough that there was no confusion about what had happened. Whatever hope still existed in his mind died instantly inside that room. Panic exploded. Emergency calls followed. Police and paramedics rushed toward the property while neighbors slowly became aware that something horrifying had occurred nearby. Flashing lights soon illuminated the quiet street. Officers sealed the area. Detectives entered the home carefully, stepping into what would become one of the most infamous crime scenes in British Columbia history. But the killers were already gone. No witness definitively saw them leave. That fact remains one of the most chilling aspects of the entire case. At some point after the murder, two people exited that house and disappeared into the evening without attracting meaningful attention. Maybe they walked calmly to a nearby vehicle. Maybe they changed clothing beforehand. Maybe they moved through the neighborhood so confidently that nobody looked twice at them. Some investigators later wondered whether a second exit route or getaway strategy had been carefully planned in advance. Others believed the killers simply exploited the normal blindness of suburban life, where people rarely observe strangers closely unless given a reason. Inside the house, detectives immediately recognized they were dealing with something highly unusual. Violent crimes leave traces, especially knife attacks. Yet the scene offered remarkably little forensic evidence considering the brutality involved. Investigators searched relentlessly for fingerprints, biological material, fibers, footprints, anything capable of identifying the attackers. Almost nothing emerged. That absence changed the tone of the investigation immediately. This did not resemble a spontaneous confrontation spiraling out of control. It looked methodical, intentional, controlled despite the violence. And then detectives uncovered another deeply unsettling detail. The phone used to arrange the showing was a prepaid burner phone purchased anonymously in Vancouver. It had only been used to communicate with Lindsay. After the murder, it vanished from activity permanently. Cell tower analysis showed its movement from the mainland to Vancouver Island shortly before the killing, likely aboard a ferry crossing. The implication was terrifying. Someone had planned this carefully enough to avoid creating a digital trail. Someone had invested time and effort specifically into reaching Lindsay. And by the end of that cold February evening, 24-year-old Lindsay Buziak was dead on the floor of an empty luxury home while the people responsible disappeared into darkness so completely that nearly 2 decades later, nobody officially knows who they were. The first police officers arriving at 1702, D'Souza Place that night probably expected chaos. Violent crime scenes usually announce themselves immediately. Panic spills out into the street. Witnesses scream over one another. Blood trails lead through hallways. Doors hang open. Evidence scatters itself everywhere because human beings are messy, emotional creatures when violence erupts unexpectedly. But the house that greeted investigators on the evening of February 2nd 2008 felt unnaturally controlled. Quiet. Almost staged in its stillness. And that silence would become one of the most disturbing elements of the entire investigation. Emergency lights painted the wet suburban street in pulses of red and blue while neighbors peeked cautiously through curtains and front windows, trying to understand what had shattered the calm of their wealthy neighborhood. Police vehicles lined the road. Officers moved quickly around the property, securing the perimeter while paramedics disappeared through the front entrance. Cold February air drifted through the open back door discovered earlier by Jason and his friend. Somewhere in the distance, rainwater dripped steadily from tree branches onto pavement. But inside the house, another smell had already taken over. Blood. Fresh blood has a metallic scent people never forget once they experience it. Warm. Sharp. Heavy in the air. By the time investigators reached the upstairs master bedroom, that smell lingered throughout portions of the home. Lindsay Buziak lay dead on the floor. The scene was brutal enough that even seasoned officers reportedly recognized immediately this was no ordinary homicide. She had suffered multiple stab wounds delivered with extraordinary force and speed. Blood spread across the room in dark uneven pools against expensive flooring and pale walls designed to impress future buyers. The contrast itself felt grotesque. A luxury home built to symbolize wealth and aspiration had become the setting for a slaughter. Yet despite the violence, something about the room felt strangely incomplete. There were no signs of prolonged struggle throughout the house. Furniture had not been overturned because there was almost no furniture at all. Decorative staging pieces remained largely undisturbed. Detectives later concluded the attack likely happened very quickly, possibly before Lindsay fully comprehended the danger she was facing. The relative absence of defensive wounds suggested she had little opportunity to fight back effectively. Investigators began asking themselves the same question almost immediately. How do two people lure a healthy 24-year-old woman into an empty house, stab her repeatedly, and leave almost no trace behind? Because that realization came early. The killers had been careful. Crime scene technicians flooded the property within hours. Every surface became important. Floors, walls, door handles, stair railings, windows, bathrooms, kitchen counters. Investigators photographed every inch of the home methodically under harsh artificial lighting while forensic teams searched for biological evidence invisible to the naked eye. Fingerprint powder-coated surfaces. Evidence markers appeared across rooms. Detectives moved slowly through the property, reconstructing timelines minute by minute. But instead of discovering the abundance of evidence normally associated with knife murders, they found almost nothing useful. No obvious fingerprints belonging to unknown suspects. No meaningful DNA. No abandoned weapon. No clear forensic trail explaining how the killers entered or escaped. That absence transformed the case immediately from tragic homicide into something deeply unsettling. The violence itself suggested rage or personal targeting. Yet the execution suggested planning and discipline more commonly associated with organized criminal activity. Investigators understood early that whoever committed the murder either possessed unusual awareness of forensic investigation techniques or had simply prepared exceptionally well. Outside, the neighborhood remained frozen in disbelief. Residents later described the surreal atmosphere of watching investigators work late into the night beneath portable floodlights while rain mist drifted through the cold air. Some neighbors had seen Lindsay arrive earlier. Some remembered the mysterious couple entering the house. Yet nobody could clearly explain how or when the suspects left. That detail disturbed police profoundly because De Souza Place was not an isolated rural property hidden deep in forest. It was a residential neighborhood. People should have noticed something. But ordinary life often blinds people to danger unfolding nearby. Most witnesses only remember unusual details after learning a crime occurred. Before that moment, strangers are just strangers. Cars passing through neighborhoods are forgettable background noise. Nobody expects to witness the beginning or end of a murder. As investigators processed the scene, another troubling reality emerged. There was no evidence of robbery. Lindsay's belongings remained at the house. Expensive items had not been taken. There were also no indications of sexual assault. The crime appeared singularly focused on killing her. That focus narrowed investigative possibilities while simultaneously deepening the mystery. Random predators rarely orchestrate elaborate fake real estate appointments using burner phones. Burglars do not usually commit frenzied stabbings and then leave valuables untouched. Sexual offenders rarely expend that level of preparation without committing sexual violence. Everything about the murder pointed toward deliberate targeting. But why Lindsay? That question echoed through the investigation from the very beginning. Detectives interviewed Jason Zylo extensively that same night and in the days afterward. His discovery of the body placed him immediately at the center of investigative attention, as often happens in homicide cases involving romantic partners. Police scrutinized timelines carefully. When exactly had he arrived? Why had he waited outside? Why had he not entered sooner? Could his account be verified? Investigators obtained surveillance footage and witness statements supporting much of Jason's timeline. Cameras reportedly captured his movements in ways that aligned with his statements to police. Though public suspicion would later surround him intensely, authorities repeatedly stated he cooperated with investigators and was never charged in connection with the crime. Still, the circumstances remained emotionally complicated. Jason had been close enough to the house that evening to potentially hear something had the attack become louder or more prolonged. Yet according to investigative theories, the murder likely happened so quickly and efficiently that by the time concern truly escalated outside, Lindsay was already dead. That possibility haunted many people connected to the case. Meanwhile, forensic analysis continued deep into the night and over the following days. Detectives reconstructed Lindsay's final communications carefully. The strange phone calls arranging the showing became central almost immediately. Investigators traced the number and uncovered one of the most chilling details in the entire case. The phone used to contact Lindsay was a prepaid burner phone purchased anonymously in Vancouver. It had only been used for communication related to her. Nothing else. No personal calls. No casual messages. No unrelated activity. It existed almost solely as a tool to lure Lindsay Buziak into that house. The realization shifted the investigation dramatically. This was not spontaneous violence emerging from an argument during a showing. Someone had planned the contact process carefully. Detectives obtained records showing the burner phone had traveled from Vancouver to Vancouver Island shortly before the murder, likely aboard a ferry crossing connecting the mainland to Victoria. Investigators now faced a terrifying possibility. The killers may have traveled specifically to murder Lindsay and then disappear again. That theory carried implications far beyond an ordinary homicide investigation. Organized criminals, contract killers, or individuals experienced in covert operations suddenly entered speculative discussion because the level of preparation seemed unusually sophisticated. But another contradiction complicated matters. Most professional assassinations rely on efficiency and emotional detachment. Gunshots fired quickly. Minimal interaction. Controlled exits. Lindsay's murder, however, involved repeated stabbing, a deeply intimate form of violence requiring close physical contact. Stabbing someone multiple times is messy, exhausting, and emotionally intense. It risks leaving evidence everywhere. Yet somehow, in this case, it did not. Investigators became increasingly frustrated by the disconnect between the brutality of the attack and the near-total absence of forensic leads. Normally, violent offenders make mistakes under pressure. A fingerprint left on a railing. DNA transferred accidentally during struggle. Shoe impressions. Fibers. Something. But the killers at De Souza Place seemed almost ghost-like. As news of the murder spread across British Columbia, media attention intensified rapidly. The image of a young attractive realtor murdered during a home showing captured public fascination immediately because it violated assumptions about safety and normalcy. Realtors across Canada suddenly re-evaluated their own security procedures. Women working alone in sales professions recognized themselves in Lindsay's vulnerability. Parents saw their daughters. Young professionals saw the dangers hidden beneath routine interactions with strangers. And the mystery only deepened as more information emerged. Police released descriptions of the unidentified couple seen entering the home with Lindsay. The woman was described as blonde, older, wearing a distinctive patterned dress. The man tall and dark-haired. Composite sketches circulated publicly while investigators appealed for tips. But despite media exposure, no definitive identification came. That absence became another haunting feature of the case. How do two people commit a murder in a suburban neighborhood and vanish so completely afterward? Some investigators theorized the suspects may have altered their appearance before leaving the property. Others suggested wigs, makeup, or disguises might have been involved from the beginning. Witness descriptions varied frustratingly around details like accents, clothing shades, and physical features. Human memory under normal conditions is unreliable enough. Under extraordinary conditions, it becomes even less dependable. Meanwhile, rumors began spreading almost immediately. Some focused on Lindsay's personal relationships. Others centered around alleged connections between people in her broader social environment and drug trafficking networks operating in British Columbia. Detectives examined whether Lindsay might have known information dangerous to criminal organizations, though no evidence publicly established her direct involvement in criminal activity. Still, investigators could not ignore the possibility that the murder reflected something larger than a personal grudge. British Columbia during that era existed amid escalating tensions between organized crime groups involved in narcotics distribution and money laundering. Violence connected to those networks occasionally erupted with shocking precision. The burner phone. The calculated setup. The clean escape. All of it felt disturbingly compatible with organized planning. But again, the stabbing complicated everything. The murder scene itself felt emotional. Personal. Intimate in its violence. And that contradiction prevented investigators from settling comfortably into any single theory. As days turned into weeks, forensic laboratories continued processing evidence recovered from the house. Every microscopic trace mattered. Technicians analyzed blood patterns, examined potential fibers, reviewed fingerprints against databases, and searched for overlooked biological material. Investigators hoped advanced testing would eventually identify something capable of breaking the case open. But the results remained devastatingly limited. No breakthrough emerged. No suspect arrested. No confession. Instead, detectives found themselves trapped inside a case that seemed to dissolve every time they reached for solid ground. Each clue opened more questions rather than answers. The burner phone suggested sophistication. The violence suggested emotion. The lack of theft eliminated common motives. The unidentified couple appeared almost manufactured specifically for the crime and then erased from existence afterward. And at the center of it all remained the image investigators could never fully shake. An empty $1 million house. A young woman lying dead upstairs. And somewhere beyond the wet streets of Victoria, two killers walking free into the night without leaving enough behind to tell police who they were. By the second week after Lindsay Busiak's murder, investigators already understood they were trapped inside a case unlike anything they had expected. Most homicide investigations begin narrowing quickly. A suspect emerges. A relationship fractures under scrutiny. A witness remembers something crucial. Physical evidence starts forming a path forward. But the deeper detectives dug into Lindsay's death, the stranger the ground beneath them became. Every lead seemed to split into multiple contradictory possibilities. Every answer created new uncertainty. And hanging over the investigation like cold fog was the unbearable realization that whoever planned the murder had likely anticipated many of the police procedures now unfolding around them. The media pressure intensified almost immediately. Local news stations filled broadcasts with photographs of Lindsay smiling beside headlines describing the young realtor found stabbed to death in an upscale suburban home. National outlets soon followed. The story contained every element capable of gripping public imagination: beauty, mystery, violence, wealth, and an unidentified couple who seemed to vanish into thin air after committing murder in broad view of witnesses. Tips flooded into police departments from across British Columbia and beyond. Some came from genuinely concerned citizens. Others emerged from people chasing attention or inserting themselves artificially into tragedy. Detectives had to sort through all of it. And while the public focused on the mystery of the unidentified couple, investigators turned their attention toward everyone inside Lindsay's personal and professional life. That included Jason Zylo. In homicide investigations, intimate partners are always examined first because statistically they are often responsible. Police scrutinized Jason's timeline repeatedly. They reviewed surveillance footage, reconstructed his movements, compared witness statements, investigated phone records, examined the exact sequence of events leading to his arrival at the house. Why had he waited outside? Why not enter immediately? Why had Lindsay seemed nervous enough to ask him to accompany her in the first place? Public suspicion toward Jason intensified because people struggle emotionally with coincidence in cases like this. He had been close to the house while the murder occurred. His family held connections within the local real estate world. And true crime audiences often search obsessively for betrayal hiding beneath relationships that appear normal on the surface. But investigators repeatedly stated there was insufficient evidence linking Jason directly to the murder. Surveillance footage reportedly supported much of his timeline. He cooperated extensively with police interviews. No forensic evidence placed him inside the crime scene during the killing itself. Still, suspicion lingered in public conversation for years because unresolved cases create psychological vacuums people instinctively try to fill. And Jason was not the only person investigators examined closely. Detectives expanded outward through Lindsay's social circle, work contacts, acquaintances, former relationships, and business associations. They analyzed financial records, phone histories, appointment schedules, and personal communications, searching for anything that might explain why she had been targeted so precisely. At first glance, Lindsay's life appeared relatively ordinary. Ambitious young professional. Active social life. Close family. Romantic relationship. Nothing obviously connected to deadly enemies. But then investigators encountered whispers. British Columbia in the late 2000s existed in the shadow of escalating organized crime activity, particularly surrounding narcotics trafficking networks tied to cocaine and marijuana distribution. Gang affiliations blurred unexpectedly into mainstream society through nightlife, business relationships, luxury purchases, and overlapping social environments. Individuals connected to criminal enterprises often moved comfortably through expensive neighborhoods and legitimate industries while concealing darker operations beneath polished appearances. Some names connected loosely to Lindsay's broader social environment had surfaced previously in narcotics investigations. That discovery opened one of the most controversial and enduring theories surrounding the case. Was Lindsay murdered because she knew something dangerous? Investigators explored whether she may have encountered information indirectly through relationships or social proximity that placed her at risk without fully understanding it herself. Perhaps she overheard conversations, recognized faces, became aware of criminal activity involving people more dangerous than she realized. In organized crime environments, perceived liabilities are sometimes eliminated not because of what they have done, but because of what they might know. The theory gained traction publicly because parts of the murder resembled organized planning. The burner phone purchased anonymously in Vancouver. The carefully orchestrated fake clients. The near-total absence of forensic evidence. The calm disappearance afterward. These elements suggested preparation uncommon in ordinary domestic homicides. Yet major contradictions persisted. Organized crime killings typically prioritize efficiency, firearms, quick executions, minimal emotional exposure. Lindsay's murder involved repeated stabbing, an intensely personal and physically demanding form of violence. Detectives struggled to reconcile the disciplined planning surrounding the crime with the savage intimacy of the attack itself. Some investigators privately speculated the stabbing may have carried symbolic meaning. Rage disguised within professionalism. Or perhaps the killers intentionally chose a quieter weapon to avoid attracting attention in the neighborhood. Gunshots would have echoed through the suburban street immediately. A knife allowed silence. Still, something about the brutality felt deeply emotional. As detectives pursued organized crime angles, they also investigated the possibility that the murder stemmed from personal obsession or resentment. Female professionals sometimes attract dangerous fixations from clients, co-workers, or strangers. Realtors in particular often expose themselves to vulnerability through isolated meetings with unfamiliar individuals. Could Lindsay have encountered someone who developed an unhealthy attachment to her? Someone rejected or humiliated? Someone whose obsession escalated silently until violence became inevitable? Investigators reviewed prior interactions carefully. Suspicious clients. Uncomfortable showings. Past relationships. Workplace tensions. Yet no single suspect emerged convincingly from those inquiries either. And then there was the woman with the strange accent. That detail obsessed investigators because accents can both reveal and conceal identity. Witnesses and people who heard recordings of the calls described it differently. Some thought it sounded vaguely Mexican. Others believed it resembled someone attempting European pronunciation. A few suspected the accent was entirely fake, deliberately constructed to confuse identification efforts later. If the accent was fabricated, that implied another layer of preparation. The caller may have anticipated public release of witness descriptions long before the murder even occurred. Police attempted to trace the burner phone purchase through store surveillance and transaction records. But prepaid phones during that era offered far greater anonymity than modern digital systems. The phone had been activated solely for communication with Lindsay. After the murder, it effectively disappeared. Investigators tracked its movement between cell towers and determined it likely traveled from Vancouver to Vancouver Island shortly before the killing. But knowing where the phone traveled did not reveal who carried it. Meanwhile, the public became increasingly fascinated by the unidentified couple seen entering the house. Composite sketches circulated widely. Television programs reconstructed the suspects based on witness descriptions. Amateur investigators online debated every facial detail endlessly. Some believed the woman's distinctive patterned dress indicated deliberate disguise because it made her memorable while obscuring more useful identifying characteristics. Others theorized wigs may have been used. Makeup. Altered posture. Fake accents. Entire identities temporarily constructed for the purpose of murder. And perhaps most unsettling of all, nobody definitively saw them leave. That fact transformed ordinary gaps in witness observation into near-supernatural mystery. It felt impossible that two killers could simply vanish from a suburban neighborhood after committing such a violent crime. But human attention is notoriously unreliable. Investigators understood this scientifically even while the public struggled emotionally with it. People notice what they expect to notice. Two strangers calmly walking away from a house on a rainy Saturday evening do not automatically trigger alarm. Especially if they appear composed. Detectives explored whether a getaway driver or additional accomplice waited nearby. Perhaps the couple entered the house while another individual remained outside monitoring timing and neighborhood activity. Perhaps clothing changes occurred inside before departure. Maybe the killers left separately rather than together. Every scenario carried possibilities but no proof. And the lack of physical evidence kept crippling progress. Forensic laboratories continued reanalyzing collected materials repeatedly over months and years. Tiny biological traces were examined with evolving technology. Investigators hoped overlooked DNA might eventually emerge through advanced testing techniques. But at the time, results remained frustratingly limited. As public frustration grew, criticism toward the police investigation also intensified. Some believed authorities focused too heavily on certain theories while neglecting others. Others accused investigators of protecting influential individuals connected to the real estate community or broader social networks around the case. Conspiracy theories flourished online because unsolved crimes invite speculation the way darkness invites imagination. Every unexplained detail became evidence of something larger. Corruption, cover-ups, hidden criminal conspiracies. Lindsay's father, Jeff Buziak, became increasingly vocal during this period. Grief transformed gradually into determination. He publicly challenged aspects of the investigation and demanded more aggressive pursuit of answers. Like many family members of homicide victims, he found himself trapped between mourning his daughter and fighting constantly against the possibility that her case might fade into bureaucratic stagnation. The emotional toll was immense. Every anniversary reopened wounds. Every media appearance forced loved ones to relive the details repeatedly. Meanwhile, whoever killed Lindsay remained free somewhere beyond public view. That reality haunted investigators too. Experienced detectives are accustomed to violent crime, but unsolved murders affect them differently. Cases without resolution linger psychologically because the story never reaches emotional completion. Lindsay's murder in particular seemed to resist logic itself. Too sophisticated for impulsive violence. Too savage for a clean professional hit. Too targeted for randomness. Too empty of evidence for ordinary killers. It became the kind of case investigators discuss quietly years later in dim offices long after shifts officially end. Theories continued multiplying. Some believed Lindsay had unknowingly become collateral damage in a drug-related conflict involving people around her social environment. Others argued the crime was deeply personal and staged carefully afterward to resemble organized criminal activity. A few theorized jealousy or emotional betrayal motivated the murder. Some internet communities even speculated about contract killers hired by unknown parties. But no theory ever fully explained every detail. That was the problem. Every possible solution left something unresolved. If organized criminals committed the murder, why choose such an emotionally violent method? If the crime was personal, how did the killers avoid leaving meaningful forensic evidence? If Lindsay herself was not directly involved in dangerous activity, why invest such elaborate planning into targeting her specifically? Years passed without answers. The house on D'Souza Place eventually returned to ordinary existence, at least externally. New owners. Maintained lawns. Quiet evenings beneath rain-darkened skies. Yet for many people in Victoria, the address remained psychologically frozen in 2008. Mention the street name, and conversations still shifted immediately toward Lindsay. The young realtor. The fake clients. The empty luxury home. And the two strangers who walked inside with her before disappearing forever into one of Canada's most haunting unsolved mysteries. In most murder investigations, there comes a moment detectives privately refer to as the turn. The breakthrough. The instant when scattered fragments finally begin aligning into a recognizable picture. Sometimes it arrives through a confession. Sometimes through overlooked forensic evidence or a witness who suddenly remembers one crucial detail years later. Entire investigations can survive on the hope that somewhere, hidden inside mountains of reports and dead ends, a single overlooked thread still waits to unravel the truth. In the murder of Lindsay Buziak, investigators spent years chasing that moment. And for a long time, it never came. The case drifted deeper into public obsession as the years passed. Podcasts dissected timelines down to the minute. Online forums expanded into sprawling archives filled with maps, screenshots, phone records, and theories. Amateur investigators replayed interviews repeatedly, searching for nervous body language or hidden contradictions. Every anniversary revived national attention. Every new article reopened old wounds. Yet despite the endless speculation, official progress remained painfully limited. Then, slowly, subtle changes began emerging behind the scenes. Advances in forensic science were transforming cold case investigations across North America. DNA analysis techniques that once required substantial biological material could now sometimes extract usable profiles from microscopic traces previously considered worthless. Cases decades old suddenly reopened as laboratories developed methods capable of identifying suspects through genetic genealogy and highly sensitive sequencing technology. Detectives who had once stared hopelessly at empty evidence reports now watched impossible identifications emerge from invisible fragments left behind years earlier. For Lindsay's investigators, those technological changes represented something dangerously close to hope. By the late 2010s, authorities quietly revisited physical evidence collected from the D'Souza Place crime scene. Materials once considered too degraded or insignificant underwent re-examination using newer forensic methods. Detectives reviewed preserved samples, clothing, biological traces, and microscopic particles, searching for anything modern science might finally interpret differently. The challenge remained immense because the killers had left so little behind. But cold cases often hinge on patience. Tiny details ignored during one era sometimes become transformative later. A partial DNA profile. A contaminated fingerprint recovered through improved enhancement software. A digital pattern previously invisible to investigators working with older technology. Somewhere inside the evidence from that house, police hoped, the killers might still exist invisibly. At the same time, investigators also began re-evaluating the behavioral dimensions of the crime more aggressively. Years of distance can sometimes clarify patterns obscured during the chaos of active investigation. Detectives reconsidered the logistics surrounding the burner phone, the ferry crossing from Vancouver, and the unusual sophistication of the setup itself. One realization became increasingly difficult to ignore. The murder required coordination. Even if only two people physically entered the house, the planning suggested broader awareness. Someone purchased the burner phone anonymously. Someone studied Lindsay enough to understand her professional vulnerability. Someone selected the property and timing carefully. Someone likely monitored schedules and movements. The crime felt less like spontaneous violence and more like an operation. That conclusion intensified scrutiny toward possible organized criminal connections once again. British Columbia's gang conflicts during that era had involved individuals skilled at avoiding law enforcement attention. Money laundering networks operated through legitimate businesses. Criminal associates moved comfortably through upscale social environments. Violence sometimes emerged with startling precision when perceived threats required elimination. And yet, Lindsay herself still did not fit cleanly into that world. Friends and family continued insisting she was not involved in criminal activity. Investigators publicly stated they had uncovered no evidence directly linking her to narcotics trafficking. That contradiction remained central to the mystery. If organized elements were responsible, why target Lindsay specifically? Some detectives reportedly revisited the possibility that she may have witnessed, overheard, or inadvertently learned something dangerous without fully understanding its significance. In criminal environments built on paranoia and secrecy, even accidental exposure can become fatal if the wrong individuals perceive risk. But there was another possibility investigators increasingly considered over time. What if the murder only appeared larger and more sophisticated because of how carefully it had been staged? That theory suggested the killers intentionally constructed false impressions designed to mislead police. The fake accent. The burner phone. The mysterious wealthy clients. All of it may have been theater, carefully designed to push investigators toward organized crime speculation while obscuring a more personal motive hidden underneath. The problem was that no single theory ever fully survived contact with the evidence. And then came 2021. More than 13 years after Lindsay's death, authorities publicly announced renewed investigative momentum involving advanced DNA analysis and assistance from the FBI. The announcement reignited enormous public interest immediately. Families of homicide victims often describe hope as emotionally dangerous because every potential breakthrough carries the risk of fresh disappointment. But this development felt significant enough that many people believed the case might finally be approaching resolution. Investigators revealed that evidence from the crime scene had undergone new forensic testing using technology unavailable in 2008. They did not disclose specifics publicly, but the involvement of federal resources suggested authorities believed remaining biological traces might still possess investigative value. The announcement sent shockwaves through true crime communities. For years, the murder of Lindsay Busiak had existed as a near-mythological unsolved case. People debated whether the killers had truly escaped without leaving evidence or whether police simply lacked the technology to recognize what they already possessed. Now, suddenly, modern science appeared capable of reopening doors once considered permanently sealed. Speculation exploded again. Did police finally recover usable DNA? Had genealogical databases identified possible relatives of the suspects? Was someone secretly under surveillance while investigators built a prosecutable case? Online communities analyzed every public statement obsessively. Every carefully chosen phrase from investigators became material for interpretation. Some believed authorities were strategically withholding progress to avoid alerting suspects prematurely. Others feared the renewed announcements represented little more than procedural optimism without substantive breakthroughs. Behind the scenes, investigators continued pursuing interviews and reassessments. People connected to the case years earlier found themselves revisited by detectives asking familiar questions through the lens of modern analysis. Time changes memory, but it also changes relationships. Former associates drift apart. Loyalties weaken. Fear fades. Individuals once unwilling to cooperate sometimes begin speaking after years of silence. And silence itself became one of the most psychologically haunting aspects of the entire investigation. Because somebody knew what happened inside that house. Maybe more than one person. Someone remembered the planning conversations before the murder. Someone remembered purchasing the phone. Someone remembered crossing the ferry toward Vancouver Island. Someone remembered the exact moment Lindsay realized something was wrong. Yet despite enormous media attention and years of investigation, nobody publicly stepped forward with the missing truth capable of collapsing the mystery. Detectives understood something else too. Murders involving multiple participants often fracture over time. Secrets become harder to carry. Relationships dissolve. Fear evolves into resentment. One participant may begin believing another could eventually betray them. Entire cold cases have broken open decades later because a single accomplice reached emotional exhaustion. Perhaps investigators hoped time itself might become the breakthrough. Meanwhile, Lindsay's father continued refusing to let public attention disappear. Jeff Busiak became more than a grieving parent over the years. He became an advocate, investigator, and relentless public voice demanding accountability. His persistence kept pressure alive long after many cold cases fade into obscurity. Interviews, demonstrations, media appearances, public statements. He carried his daughter's story forward through sheer refusal to surrender. But grief changes people. Those who watched Jeff over the years often noticed the exhaustion beneath his determination. Unsolved murder creates a unique psychological torture because mourning cannot settle naturally without resolution. Every possibility remains alive simultaneously. Hope and despair exist side by side. Anger has nowhere stable to land. For Lindsay's loved ones, every new development carried emotional risk. Because what if the truth finally emerged? And what if it never did? The renewed forensic efforts in 2021 created another strange effect as well. People once connected distantly to the case suddenly became nervous again. Public discussions resurfaced old suspicions. Former rumors regained visibility online. In cold cases, time can create false confidence among individuals who believe investigations have permanently stalled. New technology destroys that illusion. Some observers wondered whether the announcement itself functioned partly as strategy. By publicly emphasizing advanced DNA analysis and FBI involvement, investigators may have hoped to pressure individuals connected to the crime psychologically. Fear changes behavior. Guilty people begin watching news coverage obsessively. Old accomplices contact one another nervously. Some make mistakes. Still, despite renewed momentum, no arrest came. No public suspect identified. No dramatic courtroom confrontation unfolded. And that absence reinforced the terrible reality at the heart of the case. Breakthroughs do not always guarantee justice. Sometimes investigations move closer to truth without fully reaching it. Evidence can suggest without conclusively proving. Detectives may know far more privately than they can legally demonstrate in court. That possibility haunts many observers of the Lindsay Busiak case today. Perhaps investigators already possess strong suspicions they cannot yet substantiate publicly. Perhaps fragments of truth exist scattered across witness statements, forensic reports, and confidential intelligence files, forming a picture just incomplete enough to prevent charges. Or perhaps the killers truly executed one of the most effective disappearances in modern Canadian criminal history. Either way, the years transformed the murder from a local tragedy into something larger. The case became symbolic of vulnerability hiding beneath ordinary life. A young professional lured into an empty house through trust and ambition. A meticulously planned act of violence unfolding inside one of the safest-looking environments imaginable. And somewhere beyond the official statements, beyond the DNA analysis and investigative updates, one possibility still lingers like a shadow over the entire story. The people responsible for Lindsay Busiak's death may still wake each morning knowing they succeeded. Knowing they entered that house on a cold February evening in 2008, carried out a brutal murder, disappeared into the darkness beyond Victoria's rain-soaked streets, and nearly 2 decades later, still have not faced justice for what they did. In most true crime stories, this is the part where the courtroom doors finally open. Prosecutors arrange stacks of evidence beneath fluorescent lights. Detectives take the witness stand after years chasing the truth. Families sit silently in the gallery waiting to hear a verdict capable of ending the nightmare. There is usually a defendant seated beside defense attorneys, eyes lowered while photographs of the victim appear across giant courtroom screens. Justice, at least in narrative form, tends to arrive eventually. The audience expects it. Years of crime documentaries and police dramas have conditioned people to believe every mystery ultimately narrows into a name, a trial, and a sentence handed down beneath the seal of the court. But the murder of Lindsay Busiak refuses to follow that structure. There has never been a trial. No arrest. No televised perp walk. No prosecutor standing before cameras announcing charges against the people responsible for luring a 24-year-old realtor into a vacant luxury home and stabbing her to death. Instead, the years after Lindsay's murder unfolded inside a different kind of courtroom. One without judges or legal closure. A courtroom built from public suspicion, media speculation, online investigations, and relentless emotional exhaustion. In the absence of official justice, everyone connected to the case found themselves pulled into an endless unofficial trial where theories replaced evidence and suspicion became its own form of punishment. No one experienced that more intensely than the people closest to Lindsay. For her family, grief quickly became entangled with frustration toward the investigation itself. The murder seemed too calculated, too visible, too strange to remain unsolved indefinitely. People expected answers quickly. The fake clients had been seen by witnesses. The burner phone left a digital trail across Vancouver and Vancouver Island. Someone had orchestrated the meeting carefully. Surely, many believed, the police would eventually connect the missing pieces. But weeks became months. Months became years. And still, no one stood accused in court. That vacuum allowed public suspicion to spread outward like wildfire. Entire lives became consumed by scrutiny, rumor, and internet speculation. Jason Zylo, despite repeated police statements emphasizing his cooperation and lack of charges, remained trapped beneath ongoing suspicion from segments of the public. True crime communities dissected his interviews repeatedly. Body language analysts examined his expressions frame by frame. Internet forums treated every inconsistency in memory or wording as hidden evidence of guilt. This is one of the darker realities of unsolved cases in the digital era. When official justice stalls, public imagination creates its own prosecutions. People searched obsessively for someone to blame because emotionally, uncertainty feels unbearable. Human beings struggle to accept unresolved violence. We crave conclusions, even imperfect ones. Without arrests or convictions, The case transformed into a puzzle millions of strangers felt compelled to solve themselves. And meanwhile, Lindsay's real family continued waking up each morning without answers. Jeff Buziak became increasingly outspoken over the years, publicly criticizing aspects of the investigation and demanding continued pressure from law enforcement. His grief sharpened into determination. Some families collapse inward after tragedy. Others become fighters. Jeff became the latter. Interviews, public statements, demonstrations, anniversary events. He refused to allow Lindsay's name to disappear quietly into cold case archives. But there is a cost to living inside unresolved grief for that long. Every public appearance required revisiting the details of Lindsay's final moments. Every anniversary reopened emotional wounds that never fully healed in the first place. Parents are not supposed to spend decades imagining the terror their child experienced before death. Yet unsolved homicide forces exactly that kind of psychological torment onto surviving families. And throughout it all, the legal system remained painfully silent. No indictments. No courtroom testimony. No cross-examinations revealing hidden truths. Just investigators occasionally announcing renewed efforts while carefully withholding operational details from the public. The closest thing resembling a judicial turning point arrived through advancements in forensic science years later. By the early 2020s, cold case investigations across North America had begun benefiting from revolutionary DNA analysis methods and genetic genealogy techniques capable of identifying suspects from microscopic traces previously considered useless. The public watched famous unsolved murders collapse suddenly after decades because science finally caught up with evidence preserved years earlier. When investigators announced renewed forensic work and FBI involvement in Lindsay's case, many people believed the long-awaited courtroom phase might finally be approaching. Hope surged again. News reports discussed advanced DNA technology. Investigators hinted carefully at ongoing developments. Online communities exploded with speculation that arrests could be imminent. Some observers believed authorities already knew who committed the murder but lacked enough evidence for prosecution. Others feared the announcements represented strategic pressure rather than genuine breakthroughs. But once again, the case resisted resolution. No public charges emerged. And that absence revealed a painful truth often hidden behind simplified crime narratives. Knowing what likely happened is not the same as proving it beyond reasonable doubt in court. The justice system demands evidence capable of surviving legal scrutiny. Detectives may hold powerful suspicions privately for years while remaining unable to secure convictions. Witness credibility weakens over time. Memories fade. Physical evidence degrades. Suspects lawyer up or disappear. Entire cases can hover permanently in the terrible space between suspicion and proof. That possibility hangs heavily over the murder of Lindsay Buziak. Because many observers, including some investigators, appear to believe the truth exists somewhere within reach even if it cannot yet be publicly demonstrated. And so the courtroom remained empty. Instead, the case evolved into something almost mythological within Canadian true crime culture. Podcasts revisited the mystery repeatedly. Television programs reconstructed the final hours inside the D'Souza Place home. Online investigators built elaborate timelines and suspect maps stretching across decades. The unidentified couple became ghost-like figures haunting public imagination. A blonde woman with a strange accent. A dark-haired man entering a vacant house at dusk. Two strangers stepping through a doorway before disappearing permanently into uncertainty. Without legal closure, every theory remained alive. Some believed organized crime figures orchestrated the killing because Lindsay inadvertently became connected to dangerous individuals through social proximity. Others insisted the murder was intensely personal and disguised carefully to resemble professional criminal planning. Some theorized multiple accomplices participated. Others believed the truth involved betrayal from someone Lindsay trusted. But theories are not verdicts. And speculation, no matter how obsessive, cannot replace evidence presented before a jury. There is another reason the absence of trial matters so deeply in this case. Courtrooms do more than punish offenders. They establish narrative authority. Trials organize chaos into official sequence. Witnesses testify. Timelines solidify. Facts separate from rumor. Families finally hear institutions state publicly, this is what happened, and this is who bears responsibility. Lindsay's case never received that process. Instead, uncertainty became permanent. Even the house itself carried the psychological weight of unfinished justice. Long after police tape disappeared and media trucks left the neighborhood, the property on D'Souza Place remained connected forever to violence in public memory. New owners moved through rooms where blood once covered the floor. Neighbors continued glancing toward the home differently after dark. Places absorb history whether people want them to or not. Some crimes permanently alter geography. And perhaps nowhere is the absence of justice felt more sharply than in the small details of everyday life continuing without resolution. Birthdays passing. Holidays arriving. Friends growing older while Lindsay remains frozen forever at 24 years old inside public memory. The world continued moving relentlessly forward after February 2, 2008. Real estate markets changed. Businesses closed. New families moved into Victoria neighborhoods. Teenagers became adults. Entire technologies transformed daily life. But for those closest to Lindsay, part of time stopped inside that empty house. Years later, investigators still occasionally revisit evidence. Public appeals continue. Advances in forensic science keep hope alive that someday the legal phase of the story may finally begin. Perhaps one day detectives will announce arrests. Perhaps some hidden biological trace will eventually identify the killers conclusively. Perhaps someone burdened by years of silence will finally decide to speak. Or perhaps the murder of Lindsay Buziak will remain permanently suspended between suspicion and proof, one of those rare cases where everyone senses human evil nearby but the justice system never fully catches up to it. That possibility is difficult to accept because people want moral balance. We want violence punished. We want families given answers. We want killers dragged into courtrooms where fluorescent lights expose every hidden secret before juries and cameras alike. But reality does not always provide that ending. Sometimes the courtroom never fills. Sometimes no verdict ever arrives. And somewhere beyond the public speculation, beyond the forensic testing and police statements, the individuals responsible for Lindsay's death may still carry the memory of that February evening privately inside themselves. They may remember every staircase, every shadowed room, every second leading up to the attack. While the rest of the world continues waiting for a trial that has still never come. Nearly 2 decades have passed since Lindsay Buziak walked into that empty house on D'Souza Place and never walked back out. The rain that fell across Victoria on the night of February 2, 2008 disappeared long ago into storm drains and oceans. The police tape came down. The media vans left the neighborhood. Families on the street returned to ordinary routines. New owners eventually moved through the house where detectives once photographed bloodstains beneath harsh forensic lights. From the outside, life continued the way life always does after tragedy. Streets remained quiet. Trees continued swaying in the coastal wind. Ferries crossed dark water between Vancouver and Vancouver Island every evening carrying strangers who knew nothing about the history hidden in one suburban home. But some stories never truly end. They linger. The murder of Lindsay Buziak remains one of those cases that refuses to settle into the past because it still feels unfinished. Not just legally unfinished. Emotionally unfinished. Psychologically unfinished. The absence of answers transformed the case into something larger than a homicide investigation. It became a reflection of fear hiding beneath ordinary life. A reminder that danger sometimes arrives dressed in politeness, speaking calmly through a telephone line, pretending to be opportunity. That is part of what makes Lindsay's story so haunting. She was not abducted from a dark alley or attacked while wandering somewhere obviously dangerous. She was working. Smiling professionally. Unlocking a door for clients in a wealthy neighborhood during the early evening hours. Everything about the situation appeared normal on the surface. And maybe that is what unsettles people most deeply. The realization that ordinary routines can become fatal when placed in the hands of the wrong people. For many women, especially those working in professions requiring interaction with strangers, Lindsay's murder struck a deeply personal nerve. Realtors across North America re-evaluated safety procedures after the case became public. Some agencies introduced stricter protocols for meeting unknown clients. Agents began sharing locations with co-workers, requesting identification before showings, avoiding vacant properties alone after dark. Yet even today, countless professionals continue placing trust in strangers every single day because modern working life often demands it. That uncomfortable truth remains woven through the case. Lindsay's ambition was not reckless. Her professionalism was not naive. She made the same calculation millions of people make constantly: suppress discomfort, stay polite, complete the job. The people who targeted her appear to have understood that instinct perfectly. They weaponized normalcy itself. A luxury home. Wealthy clients. A promising commission. Every detail designed to feel just believable enough. And somewhere inside that reality exists one of the cruelest dimensions of the crime. Lindsay's best qualities may have made her vulnerable. Her openness. Her drive. Her willingness to trust people despite uncertainty. Those qualities should have helped build a future. Instead, they led her toward the final moments of her life. Over the years, public fascination with the case has never disappeared. New generations discover the story through documentaries, podcasts, online forums, and true crime channels. The details continue circulating because the mystery feels almost impossible to accept emotionally. A young woman murdered in a vacant house. A fake couple disappearing without trace. A burner phone purchased anonymously. No arrests. No resolution. The case carries the structure of fiction while remaining horrifyingly real. But beneath all the theories and speculation exists a human loss that can easily become obscured by the mystery itself. Lindsay was 24. 24 is an age filled with unfinished becoming. Most people at 24 are still assembling themselves piece by piece. Careers remain uncertain. Relationships evolve. Dreams shift constantly between confidence and fear. There are future apartments not yet rented. Trips not yet taken. Arguments not yet forgiven. Entire versions of adulthood waiting to unfold. Lindsay never received any of that time. Her family lost not only who she was, but everything she would have become. That is what violent crime steals beyond the immediate moment of death. Futures. Possibilities. Entire decades erased before they happen. For Jeff Buziak, the years after Lindsay's murder became defined by persistence. Many parents confronted with unsolved violence eventually discover there is no clean way to continue living afterward. Grief changes shape over time, but it never disappears entirely. Some days it arrives quietly through photographs and memories. Other days it erupts unexpectedly through anger, frustration, or helplessness. Jeff chose to fight publicly because remaining silent felt impossible. He kept Lindsay's name visible when time threatened to bury the case beneath newer tragedies and passing headlines. And perhaps that persistence matters more than people realize. Cold cases survive partly through memory, through refusal, through the unwillingness of loved ones to allow the victim's existence to shrink into statistics or forgotten evidence boxes. Every interview, every anniversary event, every renewed discussion keeps pressure alive in ways impossible to fully measure. Sometimes justice arrives only because someone refused to stop asking questions long after everyone else moved on. Still, there are nights when the silence surrounding Lindsay's murder must feel unbearable. Because somewhere out there, somebody knows exactly what happened inside that house. Somebody remembers the planning, the phone calls, the drive through rain-darkened streets. The moment Lindsay opened the front door and smiled professionally at people she believed were clients. Somebody remembers the fear in her final seconds. And perhaps the most disturbing possibility is this: the people responsible may have spent years living ordinary lives afterward. Eating dinner with family. Watching television. Celebrating birthdays. Growing older while Lindsay remained forever frozen at 24. Human beings often imagine killers as visibly monstrous, permanently haunted by obvious guilt. Reality is rarely that simple. Some offenders compartmentalize horrifying acts with terrifying normalcy. That possibility casts a shadow over the entire case. Because if the murder truly involved careful planning and multiple participants, then silence itself became part of the crime. Silence maintained year after year. Silence surviving changing relationships, passing time, advancing technology, and endless public attention. Yet despite everything unresolved, the story of Lindsay Busiak also reveals something else about human nature. People continue caring. Strangers separated by geography and time still discuss her case because something about it feels profoundly unfair. The image of a young woman lured into danger through trust touches a universal fear people immediately recognize. Maybe that collective attention cannot replace justice, but it prevents disappearance. Lindsay's name continues being spoken. Her face continues being remembered. And memory matters. In a strange way, unsolved cases become battles against erasure. Violence attempts to reduce a human life into a single brutal ending. The people left behind resist by preserving the victim's existence beyond the crime itself. Friends remember laughter. Family remembers childhood moments. Photographs preserve expressions untouched by fear. Stories continue long after headlines fade. Perhaps that is the final tragedy of the house on De Souza Place. It was built to represent aspiration, wealth, safety, future happiness. Instead, it became permanently linked to one terrifying truth: evil does not always announce itself clearly before arriving. Sometimes it speaks softly. Sometimes it waits patiently behind rehearsed voices and polite smiles. And sometimes the most dangerous moments in life begin as completely ordinary evenings. Even now, if you drive through quiet suburban neighborhoods after dark, everything still looks peaceful from the outside. Porch lights glow warmly. Rain collects along curbs. Expensive homes stand silent beneath winter skies. People assume safety because the streets appear calm. But the murder of Lindsay Busiak shattered that illusion forever for many who followed the case. Because somewhere between professionalism and trust, between ambition and caution, between stranger and threat, a young woman stepped into an empty house believing she was showing property to potential buyers. Instead, she walked directly into one of Canada's most haunting unsolved murders. And after all these years, the silence left behind still feels almost as frightening as the crime itself. Long after the investigation faded from daily headlines, people in Victoria still remembered where they were when they first heard about Lindsay Busiak. Some learned through breaking news reports flashing across local television stations that Saturday night. Others heard rumors spreading through phone calls and text messages before official details emerged publicly. A young realtor murdered during a house showing. Stabbed inside an empty $1 million home. 2 unidentified clients disappearing into darkness. The story moved through the city with the strange energy only certain crimes create, the kind that instantly changes how people look at familiar places afterward. Because the murder did not feel distant. It happened in a neighborhood that looked safe. The streets around De Souza Place were lined with expensive homes, manicured lawns, and quiet cul-de-sacs where people expected ordinary suburban life to continue undisturbed. Parents raised children there. Professionals returned home after work believing they had chosen one of the safer corners of British Columbia to build their lives. Yet violence entered that environment without warning and left behind a truth nobody could comfortably ignore afterward: safety is often an illusion constructed from routine. That realization lingered far beyond the investigation itself. In the years following Lindsay's death, real estate agents across Canada quietly changed their habits. Some stopped meeting unfamiliar clients alone altogether. Others created emergency check-in systems with co-workers and family members. Brokerages introduced new safety protocols. Agents began photographing identification cards before appointments or insisting on office meetings first. Female realtors especially understood immediately how easily Lindsay's situation could have been their own. Empty homes are part of the job. Strangers are part of the job. Trusting people enough to walk them through vacant properties is part of the job. The difference between ordinary work and catastrophe can sometimes be terrifyingly small. And perhaps that is why the case continues haunting people so deeply even now. Lindsay's murder shattered the comforting belief that danger always announces itself clearly beforehand. There was no masked intruder forcing entry into a home. No dramatic public confrontation. No obvious warning visible from a distance. The killers approached through professionalism and normal social behavior. They used politeness as camouflage. That detail changed how many people viewed human interaction afterward. Because once you realize someone can calmly arrange a fake business meeting days in advance while planning murder beneath the surface, ordinary trust itself begins feeling more fragile. For Lindsay's family, however, the emotional damage extended far beyond public fear or media fascination. Their grief unfolded across years without the relief of resolution. Unsolved murder creates a unique psychological wound because there is no final moment of emotional release. Trials, convictions, and sentencing hearings cannot restore lost lives, but they at least establish narrative completion. Families hear evidence publicly presented. Responsibility becomes official. The system acknowledges what happened. Without that process, mourning becomes suspended indefinitely. Every new lead creates hope. Every dead end reopens despair. Imagine living year after year knowing the people responsible for your daughter's death may still be walking freely through the world. Shopping for groceries. Laughing at restaurants. Growing older while your child remains permanently frozen in memory at 24 years old. That is the reality Lindsay's loved ones have carried since 2008. And time does not necessarily make that burden lighter. In some ways, it becomes heavier. Because as years pass, witnesses forget details. Evidence degrades. Public attention fluctuates. Investigators retire or move on to other assignments. The fear surrounding cold cases is not only that justice will never arrive, but that eventually the world itself may stop caring enough to keep searching. Yet Lindsay's case resisted disappearance. Part of that persistence came from the deeply unsettling nature of the crime itself. Another part came from the determination of people who refused to let the story fade quietly away. Podcasts revisited the mystery repeatedly. Television specials reconstructed the final timeline again and again. Internet communities dedicated thousands of hours to analyzing documents, interviews, and theories. Sometimes true crime attention becomes exploitative spectacle. But sometimes it also functions as collective memory, keeping pressure alive around cases authorities might otherwise struggle to prioritize indefinitely. Still, public fascination creates its own complications. Over the years, the line between investigation and speculation often blurred dangerously. Innocent people found themselves scrutinized endlessly online. Rumors hardened into assumed facts through repetition. Conspiracy theories multiplied because unsolved cases invite imagination to fill empty spaces. Some theories may have contained fragments of truth. Others likely caused unnecessary pain to people already traumatized by the murder itself. That tension sits at the center of modern true crime culture. People seek understanding, closure, narrative resolution. But real human beings exist behind every mystery, and unresolved investigations rarely fit neatly into dramatic storytelling structures. The murder of Lindsay Busiak became both a criminal case and a cultural phenomenon, which meant her identity risked being overshadowed by speculation surrounding the circumstances of her death. But Lindsay was more than a mystery. She was a daughter who once sat at family dinners laughing about ordinary things nobody remembers anymore because tragedy erased them from public focus. She was a young woman trying to establish a career in an intimidating industry. She had insecurities, ambitions, frustrations, private jokes, favorite songs, future plans. Those details matter because violent crime often strips victims down into symbols rather than people. And perhaps the greatest injustice beyond the murder itself is how quickly society begins defining victims solely by how they died. Lindsay deserved more life than the story ultimately allowed her. There are moments when cases like this force people to confront uncomfortable truths about randomness and vulnerability. Human beings desperately want to believe good judgment guarantees safety. We tell ourselves danger can always be avoided through caution, intelligence, or instinct. But Lindsay did feel uneasy. She recognized something strange about the callers. She arranged for Jason to remain nearby because part of her sensed risk. And still, the killers succeeded. That reality is psychologically disturbing because it suggests instinct alone cannot always protect people from carefully planned harm. Somewhere out there, individuals spent time constructing the circumstances of her death deliberately. They understood enough about human behavior to manipulate professional obligation and social politeness. They counted on Lindsay continuing with the appointment despite her discomfort because most responsible adults do exactly that every day. We override intuition constantly in order to appear rational, courteous, and competent. The people responsible for the murder appear to have exploited that social conditioning with horrifying precision. Even now, nearly 20 years later, the unanswered questions remain overwhelming. Who were the two people entering the house with Lindsay that evening? Were they the actual killers or merely participants in a larger plan? Was the strange accent genuine or fabricated? Did the murder stem from organized criminal connections, personal betrayal, or motives investigators never fully uncovered? How did the attackers leave so little forensic evidence behind after such a violent crime? And perhaps most hauntingly of all, how many people truly know the answer? Because crimes requiring coordination rarely exist entirely inside one person's mind. Somebody may have heard conversations before the murder. Somebody may have noticed suspicious behavior afterward. Somebody may still be carrying memories too dangerous, painful, or self-incriminating to reveal publicly. Silence became one of the killer's greatest weapons. But silence also carries weight over time. Cold cases sometimes break unexpectedly decades later because guilt evolves. Fear changes shape. Relationships collapse. People grow older and begin reassessing the secrets they carry. A single conversation, one overlooked witness, one tiny piece of forensic evidence recovered through advancing technology can suddenly transform impossible mysteries into solvable cases. Perhaps that possibility explains why the murder of Lindsay Busiak still feels unresolved not only legally, but emotionally for so many people. The story seems suspended on the edge of revelation, as though truth remains somewhere nearby but permanently obscured by darkness just beyond reach. And until that darkness finally breaks, the image endures. A cold February evening. Wet streets beneath suburban streetlights. An ambitious young realtor stepping into an empty luxury house believing she was about to show property to potential buyers.